Hello.
Hi, my name is Will Cho, also known as Chobra. And I guess just brief intro, I'm working at OnGameNet right now. I started off as a caster for League of Legends. Here, my title is creative director. I'm doing a lot of the production work and some on-screen work for the global production here from OnGameNet in Korea.
Okay, so I mean, you've saved me the task of doing the intro there. Basically, I'm going to do a grilled with Chobra here. Just to explain like the thinking behind why I was going to do this. So I've always been from Broodwell, really fascinated with the Korean scene, and actually a byproduct of that of what the Korean scene is a byproduct of Korean culture itself. And so what makes it very difficult if you're from the West is certain things, they'll never quite make sense, you know, if you don't know like what the cultural background is. Or for example, like a lot of the things that Kesper's done have been portrayed very, very badly in the West, but really it's because like the cultural difference is so extreme that people can't even imagine. So sometimes they, you know, conjecture really evil machinations behind why these things happen. So what I'm thinking with this interview is, okay, so you've lived in Korea as a youth, you've lived in America during like your teens, you're back in Korea now, like you're one of the few people who has like experience of both cultures and the esports in both cultures. So I figured you can kind of be like a go-between here. So when I ask you something, you can not only give me like the Korean side, but give me like some of the Western equivalents as well. And so the first place I want to start out is like this, okay, basically. I've seen so many interviews about Korean esports, and one of the few questions that no one ever actually asks is like what the actual context of esports is within Korean culture. And so what I mean by that is people, even who know about Korean esports, they just imagine it's this huge thing. They think, oh, it's like a sport there and stuff. So it's like they already think they know the answer. But I once heard an interesting comparison I want to put to you, where someone told me, who was a Korean, he said, esports is like a activity or a sport. It's like bigger than in the West, but it's at the same time, it's not like it's baseball or something. He said like, he described it as being a bit like WWE. And so it has like its cult following and everyone knows it exists, but a lot of people don't watch WWE, you know, like it's a certain demographic that does. Is this like a comparable context? Like what can you say about in this sense of culture?
I'd say from like a community or like a fan point of view, that analogy is actually really good. He's exactly right that there is a following. Yeah, it is a lot bigger than in the West, but you have to imagine that anywhere where esports has existed for a couple years before the West, like it should be bigger unless it's died out. That I would say is irrelevant in terms of how it's viewed internally in Korea. You know, a lot of people have these dreams of like, yeah, man, if I want to do esports, I go to Korea, like it's going to be this great lifestyle. Everyone's going to support it. Sadly, not true. Of course, you know, as an esports fan myself, I hope it was, but you have to understand that before the esports culture, there's the actual culture of the Korean, you know, nation. And a lot of that, as many people know, is focused on like academics, you know, going kind of as what Americans might call like a stereotype of, you know, going through academics, getting a good job, you know, going through stable salaries, things like that. So it's still not very supportive, especially from the parent aspect. I think that's a lot of what people are questioning now, especially in North America, because younger and younger people are trying to get into it. And it's like, should parents support it or not? And the same issue exists in Korea too. And a lot of the professional players we see right now have struggled. And you'll see in their interviews, whenever they win a title, they're like, you know, I'm glad I can finally prove to my parents that it was worth it. You know, that's something that so many Korean players have said when they win a title. And so, and from the overall community too, gaming itself is, if anything, I would say it's actually maybe looked down upon even more than it was in the past, because it's on the radar now. You know, back in the 90s, it was like, yeah, PC cafes exist, you go and have fun, like that's that. But now, you know, the government's trying, you know, even ranging from things like, should PC cafes be like smoking or non-smoking? From there all the way to, should games have curfews? For instance, you know, League of Legends right now has a curfew if you're like under the age of 16, and whenever you play online games in Korea, you have to register with your social security number. So there's a lot of moderation, so it's always on the media radar now. So I think there's actually maybe a bit more backlash than there was before. I would say it's not that different, basically. Like you said, the esports itself, the competition, the players, there's a bigger following, but it's still very isolated.
So something you touched on there, actually, I want to go back to, and actually this is something I want to ask about in more depth, which was the aspect of not just like parental acceptance, but acceptance in terms of society accepting gaming and esports. Because here's another thing where the view in the West is very, very skewed. And I always think of it a bit like, you know, in olden times in like England, etc., there would be these stories of like, oh, if you go, there's a city far away and the streets are paved with gold and everything's awesome there. It's that sort of a story, you know. And so people imagine, okay, so if in NA, you know, esports isn't so accepted, well, it's okay because in Korea, that's like everyone there loves pro gamers. They think they're all great, and people, it's such a good job to have because you can earn this much money. But when I've read, like you're mentioning there, a lot of interviews with players who are successful, well, there's actually a famous almost sort of trope in Korean esports where if someone would win like a Brood War OSL, so this is like an incredibly hard accomplishment. Right. What's funny is when they won, there would always be a shot of them crying with their mother. And so people would always think, oh, that's like tears of joy, like it's awesome. But I always thought there was like always a bit of a sinister aspect there where some of those players, their parents might have like disowned them or kicked them out or been like, you know, you've like thrown away your life. And in this moment, they've sort of reclaimed some of that. They've sort of shown, no, I've got like a legitimate career. I've really accomplished something. And so this is like the family sort of almost reuniting on this element to some degree. As someone who's like comes from an Asian family, like your parents are Korean, etc., is it just like what the stereotype we hear that like you have to be a doctor, you have to like, that's like the first and foremost thing? Like what can you say to this element of like people being kicked out of their houses or it being very difficult if they want to become a pro gamer, like the struggle compared to like, even if someone doesn't accept it, like in inverted commas in the West, that usually just means they look down on it like a little bit. Like you can still play on the computer. It's very rare that you get like a double scenario where someone actually gets kicked out. So what can you say in Korea about the actual acceptance in that sense?
So personally, I was very fortunate because my parents also spent a lot of time in America. So they were, at least they always gave me more time. You know, if they were against it, they would still be like, well, we'll see, you know, let's look at it. If you have a plan, let us know. But in terms of the extremes, and say maybe, you know, getting kicked out onto the streets or like to your friend's house, I wouldn't be surprised if it happens more often than in North America. I wouldn't say it's like widespread. However, you know, people being very against it, you know, even for myself. So here's a good example. My parents, I thought, were much more lenient than the average Korean parent. And when I first wanted to work in esports, and this wasn't even as a player, you know, I wanted to like production and casting work, I held off on telling my parents for about like 4 months until I actually had a gig where it was by, so my first gig that I told my parents was when I got to go to MLG Raleigh in 2012, or yes, 2012, to do interviews for GG Chronicle. And sure, it was like my first time, it wasn't going to be huge, but I could give them names, I could give them websites and tell them like, this is a real thing. You know, these are organizations that are respected. And so for me to even hold off on that, because I knew that if I just told them like, hey, I'm gonna try to work in like the professional gaming community, they'd be like, is it legitimate, first of all? Like, is the organization you're working for, is it established? Like, is there good money in it? And the stereotype has come a long way. It's been twisted, you know, for fun and for sarcasm, but in general, at least my experience has been that it's not that they're greedy. It's not like parents are like, you have to make the most money, but they unfortunately get into this cycle where they're so worried about the stability of their, you know, future generations that then they go into this byproduct of greed where they're like, you have to make enough money, you always have to save up. And so in Korea, there's a ton of people who are actually really rich, but they live a very poor lifestyle because they're like, well, I have to save up. Like, you never know what's going to happen. I have to provide for like, you know, future generations and things like that. So that's, I think, one thing where a lot of, like you said in the beginning, like people view like Kespa as like evil or things like that. It's the same in families. People are like, wow, you know, Asian parents in general, you're so strict. They just want you to make money. They just want you to live well. And it's just a different notion. Their notion is you live well by having a very stable job, even if it's boring, that pays you decently. And so, you know, these days, I don't know if it's like still a doctor or whatever. I assume not. You know, the world has changed. But yeah, even when I was in Korea, I remember when I was a kid, and my friends too, you know, some of us were like, oh, I want to be a pop star, or like, oh, I want to be a pro gamer. And instantly, like, our parents would, you know, cut off those conversations, and they'd be like, okay, you know, they told us, if you wanted to do it, you would have to, you know, I would be able to support you, like, leaving school and like doing it if there was a guarantee that you were going to succeed. But there isn't. So then if you like ditch school since middle school or whatever to pursue this career and then you don't reach the top, what are you going to do afterwards? Like, that's always the concern. And that's the same concern my parents had right now when I joined esports. It was very important to them that I convinced them that I was still going to finish my academics and that I had a plan B should it not work out. And that's their biggest concern. I think gaming, yeah, sure, it's looked down upon, especially by the government these days. But the bigger issue here is, are you going to be able to sustain yourself? So You know, if gaming doesn't work out, like trying it, maybe I think a lot more parents are open to it. But if it fails, like that's where the worry comes in. And a lot of parents probably when they're, you know, when you're fighting with your parents or, you know, from both perspectives, you don't communicate clearly. So I'm sure that doesn't go through a lot, but that's the consensus I've gathered from my parents and, you know, my friends' parents. And these days when I talk to some of the other pro players, they're like, yeah, it was really tough. You know, having to convince them that this was worth it, like there was money in it and that I wasn't gonna like get kicked out after a month. You know, I would be at least given a chance for like a year or something, you know, signing a contract. And that's also, you know, contracts exist more often, I think, in Korea, like long-term contracts with teams. So the stereotype that Americans have, I don't think is completely out of the blue, but there's a lot of nuances that are not told in terms of the worries and where they come from.
Because when people bill esports in these two ways I've mentioned, okay, so it's the perfect country, Korea is awesome for esports, right. And then they think, well, you know, one of the problems in North America is gaming is not accepted, and they think that they always use this as like an excuse almost, right. But I actually think when I was trying to think of it from the Korean perspective, it might even be the case that since gaming in some ways is more accepted, okay, there isn't as big of an industry, but in terms of like socially it's more accepted, I actually think that might play a factor in why players who are pro players in the West aren't actually as good or aren't as dedicated. Because basically, if you do it in the West, I've seen people who did pro gaming stuff where what happened was they just lived a normal life. Maybe they went to school or whatever, and they were good at the game, and they were good enough where they could play like either pro or semi-pro. Then either they took a few years off and went pro while they were still good, and so that's like the equivalent to sort of like a gap year or something. But afterwards, you can come right back into society again if you quit or if you retire or you're not good enough anymore. And so it's more of a lax thing just in general, even being a pro there. But when I think of the Koreans, I've seen so many stories where even players who didn't have a bad background, okay, they weren't kicked out or disowned or anything, they still, a lot of them, like, they joined like a team house in Brood War, for example, when they were like 15 years old, or, you know, they're leaving their family and they're living with the whole team. And basically, because at that point, it's StarCraft or it's esports or it's League of Legends every day, you're almost sort of going all in. So you're sort of saying like, this isn't like a thing that I can just mess around in and leave. Like I'm going to be going all in for like trying to do like 10 years of this, you know. And so do you think that has any role to play with why these guys are so dedicated and so single-minded?
Yeah, definitely. Here's another big thing that even I was actually surprised is a lot of people, you know, Seoul is the city obviously everyone knows about in Korea, and that's what we think of when we think esports. But a lot of these players actually don't come from Seoul. Some of them do, but a lot of them have family elsewhere, like further down in the south in the countryside. And, you know, maybe, you know, they climbed the ranks of like local tournaments, or they played online tournaments that the finals were held in Seoul, things like that. And that's how they get picked up by teams. So for them to, like you said, at the age of like a high schooler, to come all the way up to Seoul in like this huge city, that there's a huge contrast there too. You're not used to it. You're away from your family's worried about whether your job is legitimate. You know, it's not even a matter of personal pride. It's a matter of like proving a point and saying, I did it, it was worth it. And now like I respect myself for my decision, more than even whether my parents support me or not. And that makes a huge difference, I would say, in anything. And I think we see it a lot in other fields too. And this goes into a whole philosophical discussion, of course. But people who have the same dreams, if you have like the equal goal, but then you start off at a time where it's harder, an environment that's harder, that person just tends to go longer because their determination is fired by such a stronger force than someone who's a little bit more comfortable.
Okay, another topic actually in terms of like some of the past context of esports is I wanted to know what you can say about how the actual penetration that Brood War had specifically as a game. Because another thing that happens is, because Brood War lasted so long, and we've all heard the stories of like the salaries people were making, and like it had 2 TV channels it was being shown on, it makes it sound like it was always very popular and it always like got to a level and stayed there. But from some of the things I've noticed, like on side things, like looking at numbers of people who were going to the finals or years when it had like peaks, it seems to me like if you look at like the 2000s, it kind of maybe peaked around the middle, like maybe 2005, 2006 is maybe when it was like at its biggest, because that's when you had a lot of like the Kesper stuff was coming into play. But then I think just looking at the success, it looks to me at least, that's what I want to get your take on, like actually it started to kind of gradually go down after that period. And like towards the end, I mean, NBC Game had to just give up their StarCraft and the whole game channel, and towards the end we were hearing stories that, you know, numbers aren't as good even for like OGN necessarily for Brood War. Like, was there like a peak at some point in Brood War? Like, was it really as pervasive within the culture, the game, as we've heard these stories of?
The game was, for sure. The esports, like you said, it was much more of kind of a one-shot thing. Okay. It got built up. So I left Korea to go back to America around 2000, 2001, okay. Right in that transition. And so by the time I left, even as an elementary school student, I was aware that there were gaming channels where tournaments were played. But also a lot of them, you know, they were played late at night, so it was meant to be for like dads who come home and who like playing games. It wasn't for students to get motivation and compete in their own tournaments. So when I left, Brood War, of course, had been started, and there were these tournaments, but it wasn't a primetime event. It wasn't super widespread. The game was, though. By the time already when I left, the common activity of, you know, male, you know, kids from elementary school to high school was finish school and like go to a PC cafe and play Brood War games. Whether you play competitively or you play custom games, that's another story, but everyone was playing it. And, you know, it's same with any activity in another country. When all of your friends play it, you play it. And of course, PC cafes made that a lot easier. The tournament, like you said, so I was in America during that peak. I didn't experience it firsthand, but when I came back and now speaking with those who have been at OGN for, you know, 10 plus years, they were like, yeah, those were the golden days. Like, where did it all go? And obviously there were a lot of changes, and people know the reasons, and a lot of that, you know, titles change, or times change, players change, but they all say, yeah, right around like from 2000. So a lot of the people who have been there since the beginning, they're like 2004 is when we really started feeling that this was worth it, like it was gonna get big. It got big, and then like 06, 07, we started seeing a drop off. And it wasn't like they crashed, but you hit it right on the spot, is that what we in the West have perceived as the image of Brood War in Korea was really only for about, I would say, 2 to 4 years. Oh, okay. The rest was a lot less, still much bigger than probably ever was in America or Europe, but a lot less than what we see as the peak. But that's the beauty of, at least on GameNet, what they do is they relive those moments so much that people, you know, it's not the fans' fault. It's actually good for the fans to remember that as what esports is, and so that keeps the drive going. I think that's great.
Because another topic along these lines, in terms of like social context of esports, is when I think of Brood War, I always think like an important distinction to make is to separate the people who just play the game and the actual esports side. But the two get intertwined so much, you know, because we've heard about Korea and Brood War. And so from my own experience, when I used to play Counter-Strike in the days when it was actually just before the esports side, it basically became an esport because it was a cultural phenomenon. There were so many people playing this free mod that like it almost forced people who did tournaments, like, oh, we better hold some tournaments in Counter-Strike. And so when people hear that Brood War was huge, it was on for 10 years, I think some of them imagine like, oh, it had like a following, like a real spot. Like if you think of like basketball, you might have a fan of like the Chicago Bulls who's like a 20-year fan, you know. Right. But I've actually heard from people who I've tried to talk to in Korea that it's more like being a fan of Brood War. If you already played the game, then the esports side was more like a phase. And so someone once described it to me like this, like, I would say to like a person who I'd met who's like my age, I'd say, oh, did you ever used to watch Brood War? They'd say, oh yeah, I used to watch it a while ago. And I'd say, oh, why did you stop? They were like, well, I just watched it for a few years. And I was like, oh, I heard like everyone played and watched it though. And he was like, well, yeah, everyone played when they were 12. And so that was like, to him, it was just like a throwaway thing. Like, yeah, I did it for a few years and then I moved on. And so the weird thing about this is it would suggest that like the fan base is almost sort of staying at a similar age. And so when I went to games, actually like the NBC, like the Pro League and stuff, it looked like the audience was always sort of like 15, 16, this sort of range. Is this like, does this match up with your experience at all? What do you think of this aspect of it?
Yeah, I would say that's true. Like I said, when I was playing it at PC cafes when I was in like 4th, 5th grade, and when I went, so yeah, the people who were competitive and knew the competitive scene and followed it were the ones who were, I would say, late middle to early high school. But most of the people who were playing were like elementary school kids who just wanted to have fun with their friends. And obviously I had no notion of what my APM was back then. You know, I just played for fun. I just played custom games with my friends. We would, you know, team up for fun and make fun of each other. That was the goal. And I think a good way to prove that is right now still, certain areas, if you go to PC cafes, you'll find people playing Brood War, but you don't see people watching it as much, you know, and there's barely any tournaments left. So people had a love for the game, and I think a phase is a really good way to put it. The esports side is what you do when, I think the age is really good there, because that's the age in Korea where you can kind of not worry as much about your academics, because you like finish the basics, and it's not quite time yet to start preparing for college and like high school examinations. Of course, the people who want to go to the best will totally skip this phase of like having some fun, but right around, I would say 6 to and then like your first 2 years in middle school, so about those 3 years is when, if you want to, that's the time when you can kind of relax in academics in Korea. So that's when people will go to like music festivals or things like that. And after that, it's not until you go to college or after college where people start enjoying those activities again out here. So it makes sense, and I'm seeing that right now too. Whenever I go to the stadium for tournaments, the majority is actually a lot younger than I would have imagined, because of course I'm coming in from mid-20s and I'm a huge esports fan, but most people there are much younger than even I am, and that was a bit of a shock for me at first, but now that I've seen it so often, I'm not surprised that kind of contributed maybe to the decline of esports of Brood War, because the people didn't stay with it like you see, you know, other, say like book series or, you know, movie series where people are like, oh, they're doing a reboot and all these people from older generations come back. It's not the same with Brood War.
Because going from Brood War, so to someone who doesn't know much about the context, they're going to think, okay, Brood War, now everyone just switches to StarCraft 2, that'll be like Brood War, what can we do to make it like Brood War, etc. But the key thing I've noticed that doesn't seem to work with StarCraft 2 in Korea is like I mentioned before when I was giving the Counter-Strike example, these games that have huge followings in esports, they work best from my perspective if the game itself is already getting huge, and then you kind of build esports onto that. You can't kind of go in reverse and go, okay, everyone in Korea, switch to StarCraft 2, please. We'll all be playing and watching this game now. Like, it doesn't work like that. You can't like command people to do it. They have to already sort of be going in that direction anyway, and you kind of like ride that wave, you know. And so the problem is, StarCraft 2, it seems like it's for certain at this point that didn't happen. They didn't just like continue on the Brood War wave and do as well or better. It's like clearly like the interest isn't there as much. But now you've got a unique scenario where, okay, so StarCraft 2 didn't work out, and StarCraft 2 fans are going to hate this part, but League of Legends, basically, to a Westerner, looks like, oh, this is like the same thing happening again, sort of. Like, now we've got tons and tons of people playing the game, now they want to watch the esports side, and now the esports thing's growing and growing with the OGN, etc. Is it the case that League of Legends is anywhere, how would you compare League of Legends in Korea now to Brood War in Korea?
I would say it's getting there, and I wouldn't be surprised if it hit the same peak or went above and beyond the peak of Brood War around, you know, 05, 06.
Like what makes you think that? Like what?
So
factors?
For one, of course, even in the short time that I've been here at OGN, the size of the audience has continuously grown, and we're starting to see rivalries, and that's best explained when you see the fans feel the rivalry. You know, you go on the online communities, and Koreans love making fan sites of whatever they follow, and you'll see these arguments within their fan sites where they're like, well, are we much better? Like, why are we better? What player is better? And then they start comparing looks now of the players. You know, they start making all these rankings amongst their biggest fans, and that's when, you know, when the community starts building upon itself. And it started because this is something a lot of people don't realize about PC cafes. Everything aside, first of all, it's super cheap in Korea, right? It's like $1 for an hour, and you can play everything for free. The problem there with StarCraft 2 was that when it first transitioned, you know, they paid much more attention, as they should, to how that works out in the PC cafes and made it much more regulated. But for the fans, it was like, I could care less about where the game came from. I just want to go play it. And League of Legends, meanwhile, people started playing on the NA server, and a lot of the League of Legends players know that if you go now, you have the option to log on to NA or Korea in the PC cafes. Okay. And that makes a huge difference in how the community builds up. And I want to jump actually just right into the PC cafe culture, because I think that's so huge. Recently, actually, I just saw this on the StarCraft Reddit too. People were wondering, so why, it comes up now and then, why don't PC cafes work as well in other countries? There's a lot of reasons. Yeah, it's cheaper, you know, the culture, the gaming culture is already here. Everything aside, it's something that most people don't realize is kids don't spend as much time at home in Korea, because even the kids who are studying, right, you go to academies, you go take classes, you study until night at your own school, like they hold classes at night. You're constantly on the move. So you either take a break on your own, go to a PC cafe with your friends for an hour, or for those who are like trying to hide it from their parents too, right? I don't condone this, but they'll be like, oh, I'm gonna go to a class, but then you have like 3 hours, and it's not weird. Parents are like, why is my kid not home yet? It's like, oh, he's probably out like studying or playing with his friends. Meanwhile, at least for me, I lived in America. You go to America, people come home, you have dinner with your family, or you watch TV with your family, or people do their own things, but there's this aspect of the living room which is really different. Because even in Korea, if you're spending time in the evening with your parents, the child will usually never have control over the remote control. Okay. So the parent chooses what they watch, and these days it's a little different, but back in the day, like, the computer was, even in the family, it was for office use. So it was in the living room, like you don't get to use it as much. So kids spending their freedom outside of the house is very common, and that allows them to build this camaraderie of friendship over computer games at PC cafes because it's readily available. All these factors come together, and people theorizing about, well, if we lower costs, if we make it more accessible, like, it's not even about suburbs or cities. It's simply, I think the biggest thing is, it's not weird for kids to be out, and so it's very easily accessible even for elementary school kids. You don't have to tell your parent you went to a PC cafe, you just go with your friends. You pay like $1 because your parent gives you like $10 for the week. It's super cheap. You go every day and you still have $3 left for snacks. Like, that kind of culture only come together, and then it builds up over the years where you start competing within your friends, and because you have to pay to go. This is something one of my coworkers mentioned. They were like, yeah, when you're in college, right, everyone's trying to save money. You want to have fun, you go to a PC cafe, and then you bet on it. You're like, whoever loses has to pay for everyone, because it's cheap. Like, I'll pay a couple extra dollars. Everyone's willing to do that, but just the nature of it helps build this kind of slightly competitive side within everyone's friendship circle who goes to PC cafes. And through that, people can appreciate esports more because you compete within your friends, and then you start looking at pro players, and you have your own teams, whoever you like. It all builds up. And now if you go to PC cafes, yeah, you can see that League of Legends, the fact that the game was so easily accessible has affected esports so much, because most PC cafes, like 90% of the people there will always be playing League of Legends, and when they're waiting for queue, they will be reading League of Legends threads. Okay. And the community's there, so now you just tack on a tournament, people are going to follow it naturally.
So this is another area where I thought we could directly contrast the West and the East, which is actually the fan culture around esports. And so again, this is another area where it seems like, funnily enough, nearly all the misconceptions almost go in Korea's favor when it's in the West. They always think it's much better than it is, I get the feeling. And so one of the areas I got this sense from is that if you ever notice the community on like the Reddit, for example, for StarCraft and even League of Legends, there's almost like a self-loathing element that they have about themselves, where they're like, oh, of course pro players are sick of like all the pieces of shit on this Reddit who just talk crap on them and so rude to them, and it's no wonder they don't want to post here. And they always have like a thing where they think that our fan culture is terrible, how they judge people, the drama. But I've heard from translations of netizens, which is what they call like Korean online people who go on these boards, etc., that in Korea things can be even worse for fans and rival fans. And what can you say about this topic for esports?
Definitely true. I think the extreme is much worse. I think the worst end is much worse.
Give me an example.
This is something I've told. So when I had to go on to the Korean broadcast for the All-Stars of League of Legends in Shanghai, I was super worried, right? Because I've never been on Korean television. Okay. I knew my pronunciation was not perfect for like going on air. And also, it had been a while since I've been an analyst. I used to do more play-by-play, so I was very concerned because I had all these notions of like, what are these netizens gonna do to me after first day? The thing is, in some ways, it's more helpful if you can get past the tone and the negativity. But what I've realized is Korean fans are much more analytical. Okay. So when they want to bash you, they will literally rip you apart piece by piece, and it's like hard to argue against it. So it's like, you pronounce this word wrong, and it's because of this part, blah blah blah, and then they'll like go back and search the source of the word. It turns into this huge discussion, which is also why rarely will people, sometimes you'll see the people who are like, guys, we need to really stop this, like no one's going to want to come to our site. But general discussion threads are much more where people just have this huge argument where there's a couple analytical people who keep putting on arguments and counter arguments, and it blows up. And I think that's why it's harder. I think that's why the worst is even worse, because it's hard to argue back. It's hard to shut them out and be like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about because he just told you he did. And you're like, well, now his negativity is like deep within me because he's completely pierced my heart and come right through the core. But on the other hand, for players, the best way to avoid that, again, is because the fan site culture is so big that it's not that, for instance, let's look at CJ Frost and Blaze. When they were on MIG, before they got picked up by Azubu or CJ, they didn't build a site for themselves and then told people to have a community. Some people decided, hey, we're going to make a site and all of these people are going to join. And they advertise it, you start joining, and then that becomes kind of your safe bubble, right? Because these fan sites will have all those rules where, just like many other of these big community threads, where you have to have been around for a certain amount of time to post in certain threads, and so players will only go into the Ligo, and they're much more supportive. And they'll have critical threads too, where they're like, I think you guys should work on this, but those are only the people who've been there since the origins and who have been recognized as top level players. So it's much safer for the players to communicate with the fans, and I think that's good for both, because we've seen this on Reddit for any title where it starts getting bigger and it's harder to control that communication, and then players are like, as much as I want to communicate with my fans, I'm just going to keep it exclusive, on my stream or on my Twitter. Like, I'm doing my own AMA, it's not on Reddit. And it's sad to see, because you can't blame the players and you can't necessarily blame the entire community, and there's just no good medium for that. But if, in Korea, the fans create it, the fans open this channel, gain the trust of the players, and then it gets recognized by the team. So now CJ recognizes that this is the official fan site. And then it becomes very easy to moderate and opens up a good communication channel so that you can sense the support, the true support of your real fans, rather than the discussion that goes up on a general discussion thread. And those still exist, but the notion of like internet cafes, I guess most people will call it here, where they build the fan sites. It's like if you take a WordPress template and then you turn it into a fan site, things like that. And they're for all the major search engines. So Down, Naver, those are one of the the two of the biggest search engines. They have their own cafe section where you can build your own blogs, and that has been really good for the players, I think, more than anything, because they can feel safer. You have this barrier where people filter a little bit, and then you can really look at the support, the constructive criticism, and then just like the jokes about your team.
Because one of the areas that I've actually been noticing, like as I've learned a little bit about Korean culture, is that, okay, so when we have a scenario like I described before, where if Reddit is too harsh on a certain player or a certain team, then it's true, there are some players who will be like, well, fuck Reddit then, I'm just not going on it anymore. Like I'm going to abandon that aspect because I don't like that thing. But that doesn't actually seem to work the same way in Korea. And so I read in a book about Korea this very interesting statement where this guy said that a study had been done to rate countries by how individualistically they thought, like each individual citizen, like a rough generality, okay? Mm-hmm. And so they did it for all these different countries around the world. And so when they did it for the USA, then out of 100 possible score, the score was like 91. And so the idea was here, any random person, sure, we have society and we have rules, but they'll actually still think individualistically. And as a result, they might value their own thoughts over the thoughts of someone else, no matter who it is. Right. But then Korea was like 19 out of 100. And so if you apply this like this, if this is true, if you then apply this to esports, then you get a scenario where even if it's fans who are being mean to you and saying mean things about you, rather than being like, well, fuck them, like I'm a pro player, what do I care? It would suggest it'll almost be the opposite. You'll almost be like, oh, what can I do to win these fans back over? Or you'll be worrying about what they're saying, like, oh, they're saying bad things about me. And so to ask you about this, I wanted to give a real case to kind of like, of an example that you could maybe cite in recent esports history. So what happened was in OGN winter, spring rather, okay, the last season of OGN for League of Legends, we had this famous scenario where in the last game of the group stage, KT Rolster B, who were, at the time were the favourites to win the whole league, they were stomping everyone. They had a match where they know they're in the playoffs already, but it's one of those bizarre scenarios where they can sort of guarantee, in theory, on paper, an easier matchup. So they wanted to avoid Najin Najin Sword, who were the champions of the previous season, so it's understandable why they want to avoid them. And they thought to themselves, well, this team MVP Ozone, and obviously the context now is that MVP Ozone won the whole league, but you have to remember back then, that was a much nicer prospect. So they essentially were given an opportunity because of the rules to rig the game so that they could purposely play the weaker route. Well, obviously people can look down on that anyway, but the difference is, in the West, I could see someone doing that, but then if people got really mad at them, just being like, well, I don't fucking care, I want to win the tournament, like, they wouldn't be at all worried or phased by it, I get the sense. But a lot of people have commented, when KT Rolster B then got completely stomped by this MVP Ozone, sure, MVP Ozone were very good, I mean, they won the whole season, but there's also a factor where the time between the matches meant that this like shitstorm of hatred had come to the KTB players, like, oh, you rigged the match, like you should have just played it out. Like, do you think this really was a factor? And like, what do you think of this, like in terms of how the fans can affect players compared to the West?
I can't say I have concrete proof, but I very well thought, as soon as I saw the matches, I was like, they have been so affected by the complete storm that they created themselves online. And which is why, of course, for big matches, a lot of the coaches will deny access to their players from going to community sites and things of that nature. But we saw it with Ozone too. Once they started winning more and more, Imp started talking a little bit more arrogantly in interviews. And then during the semifinal, they won. But during the interview, they admitted that Imp and Mata had a lot of issues in communication the day before, and they fought a lot, and that showed in their play too. And Imp, when I talked with Imp otherwise, you could tell that he was a little bit phased by the backlash from the community. Yeah, not many players will just be like, well, screw the fans, like if I win, I win. While winning is the most important in Korea, if the netizens are feared by almost every aspect in Korean culture. So even, government, whether it's social or, esports, sports, whatever it is, the netizens can be very scary because they will go further than I have ever witnessed other average, community sites go to dig things up and like shove it in your face. So it's a little bit brutal, but the thing is, once you start it, you can't be like, oh, well, I'll just wait until the finals to prove them wrong, because in that time you have no idea what's going to build up and how big it's going to get, so that you can't even take it down by taking a title. I think it affects players a lot, and I've seen it in the past with other players too, from the slightest things of if they went to a foreign tournament and they didn't perform as well. Obviously the defeat itself puts these guys on a low morale, but then the community, the fans are like, wow, you guys are complete trash now, so then they get even lower, and then they just look like this amateur team who showed up out of nowhere, and you're like, there's no other explanation. Even if they didn't practice, that level of play is not something we would ever see from these guys. There has to be this mental and emotional factor that plays in, and at that point it can only be the fans, or the anti-fans rather, online, who kind of critique them in harsher ways than normal. But yeah, so I would say the community plays a much bigger role, and the way the fans react or act on their own is very different. They have different motives than in in the West, and especially NA, because that's where I come from, so I can get a sharp contrast. And the players know that too. When they go to foreign tournaments, they're like, I really like the community, I really like the fans, because it's different. And that's all they say. It's just very different. The way they cheer for you, the way they chant, or the way they chant against you, even that makes a huge impression, because at least at the matches, you won't hear fans like booing people. If anything, they'll just try to cheer for their fans more, and that's why you see, especially back in the Brood War days, like they'll bring Thundersticks for their own fans, and they sit in their own sections, things like that. They just try to out cheer the other team, but no, there will never be any negativity live. But then online, you bring like all this negativity that you couldn't show at the venue, and you post it up. So players get affected by a lot. And when I actually had dinner with On Air when we were in Shanghai, and the other casters, and On Air was like, even for casters, this is the same for. Oh yeah, I totally forgot. On Air is the coach, or the head manager rather, for the CJ team, CJ Entis, for League of Legends, and he used to cast StarCraft and Warcraft, I believe. So what he was telling us was, players and casters alike, the important part here is that you shouldn't be swayed by the fans. You shouldn't change what you do or how you do it because of the fans. But Koreans do that so much. It's just like in our blood to follow what the masses say and appease them. And no one argued against them. We were like, that's true. That's just what we always do. And you see it even in the smallest things, like say a new toy comes out, right, for elementary school kids. In any country, it's going to get famous if your friends buy it. But in Korea, it becomes a must. And then the parents will feel like, well, now my kid needs it because otherwise he can't play with his friends, and it just snowballs into a much bigger thing than anyone can handle. And so those kind of phases, I think, are much more notable and much bigger in Korea than they would be in the West. And so your notion of, the score, I don't know how the study was done, but I think it was done quite well. I think it reflects very well on the culture.
So to get into some of the actual specific infrastructure things I wanted to know about, when we talk about team houses, I'm always thinking of the Broodwalk Kesper houses, because this is like the most solid example of like very strict hierarchy, and like the way it was all set up, it's kind of been documented, where some of the other, obviously in League of Legends, maybe it's a bit more lax for some of the teams, or in ESF, in StarCraft 2, we've heard stories of like players being allowed to stay at home if they were very good players, like MVP, etc. And so it doesn't sound like the same thing. So when I say team house in this, I'm often going to be referring to like a Kesper house, because that's where it's so extreme. And so one of the interesting topics I thought to talk about was like the actual hierarchical nature of the team and the organization, because in the West, when you bring players in, even if, let's imagine you're a big tournament, let's say Fnatic, okay, say Fnatic gets a LoL team, they will sort of get the LoL team as a complete unit from somewhere else that already existed, and it's almost like a subcontractor thing. Like, okay, we'll hire you for a year, you're going to practice, we'll pay you, and we're going to kind of pay your value based on the results. So it's almost like you're in control of how much you play and how you succeed. But obviously, if you want more money, you better do better for next year. And there's almost like the responsibility is all diffused to everyone in a certain way throughout the whole organization. And as a result, the demands aren't very large from the organization. They have specific sponsor things, but that's about it.
Right.
Whereas when you look at the Korean team houses, I get the sense that it's almost like joining a company. So let's imagine I join like a big company like Samsung or something. Even if I'm like some genius in my field, some incredible person, if I'm a new person, like I'm only 18, I've got the best grades in the world, when I join that company, I can't just walk in and be like, right guys, I'm the star around here, I'm going to sort of do things how I want to do them, and you guys just do your things over there, and just, we'll catch a player. Like, even if I'm brilliant, I have to join the hierarchy, and I have to start at the bottom, and I have to get the respect of people who are my peers, and I have to sort of curry favor with my boss. And even if I'm awesome, even if I'm just knocking it out the park, he's still going to tell me what to do and tell me, no, tweak things over here. And so actually, bizarrely to people in the West, I've heard this is a bit what it's like in Korean team houses. Like, a sort of the team, the organization owns the team. Like, they can decide who's getting kicked out of the team, not the players. Like, oh, let's kick that guy out. Sometimes they might want him to stay, but the team goes, no, he doesn't fit our team or our idea of what the team's going to be like. Is it as extreme as this?
Yeah. So basically, you become company property, and that's going to sound very offensive to some people who are not used to this, but that notion exists in any like huge company in any country, right? You become an employee, and then you're company property, where you hold company intelligence, and that applies the same to esports teams. So it's no longer a activity, right? It's no longer a sub activity. That's how they treat it. That's how they treat it as a legitimate job, is because now you are part of our company. You have to follow our company rules, our standards. And that's because Korean companies, like, this is so important to their branding. And if you look at baseball, for instance, all the professional baseball teams here are owned by companies. And so depending on how many companies want to fund baseball teams is how the league is formed. It's not like in the West, where we'll have geographical teams. Of course, sometimes like their home stadium will be in different cities, but the name will always be like the Samsung something or the Hanwha Eagles, the Lotte Twins. It's much more important which company owns them rather than where they're from, what their mascot is, or which players are on there. That's irrelevant once they enter the league, and that's where you see all of that seeping into esports, because all these companies are so used to doing that. They're like, well, if we buy this team and we put them into this league and it goes on television, what's important is they carry our name, and that's how we're gonna market ourselves even more. So now so from the company's administrative point of view, I can only imagine that these teams like KT Rolster, for instance, is really just another marketing tool for them. They're just another piece of equipment that does marketing for them. Obviously, the players, it works out because the players also want to win, but therefore their standards may be much stricter. And like you said, I've noticed it in team like League of Legends, where it's a team game. I do know of players who are like, quite frankly, like, I didn't have a problem with my teammate I thought we were fine, but administration wanted to kick them out, so that's that. Like, we're still good friends. I hope he does well, and that's why you'll see many of these guys like cheering for their friends in other teams, because they've had histories where they had no issue, but the administration just felt that it wasn't good enough. And you know, whether the administration knows what they're doing or not varies, and you can't speak on that from team to team, but that, like you said, that's how it's done. I wouldn't say it's like an iron fist, though. I wouldn't say it's like a dictatorship of where they, you know, like whip people into shape. That's not as true. That's a little bit dramatized from the West, but it is very strict. And in Korea, the other thing is, it's not weird to be strict, because it's the same at school, it's the same at home. You know, that's just what you're used to. You accept that if you go into an organization, you're gonna have to obey. And interestingly enough, I had a lot of trouble with that when I first came to OnGameNet, because I came and people were like, well, we brought you out here to kind of be a global advisor because you know what's going on in the West. And I was like, great, I know what's going on there. None of you do, because you haven't been there. I'm not saying you're dumb, like, you just didn't experience it. That's fine. Like, I don't know the Korean esports scene as much as you do. We'll do our own thing. And so I started pushing for all these things, and people are like, whoa, wait, you can't do that though, because that's just not how it's done. And I struggle with it a lot too, because I'm quite Americanized for someone who lives in Korea. And after a while, it clicked, and I was like, it's not that they don't mean harm. It's just, that's habit. You know, that's kind of second nature to them, where if you enter when you're new, like you said, it doesn't matter if you're super smart, it doesn't matter if you're the big shot from another company, you start where you are told to start. Once you grow in and once you get comfortable with people, things are different. And you know, I love my job a lot, I love my coworkers, I love working with them. But in the beginning, there was a lot of, I wouldn't say animosity, but a lot of trouble, because like my coworkers and I just couldn't understand each other, because they were like, no one ever requests this kind of thing to happen when they first enter a company. I'm like, well, this is what needs to be done. Like, what's the issue here? And it's the same for teams.
Because the reason why this is so interesting is such a stark contrast of like teams owning the players and recruiting the players and deciding who gets cut and who gets brought back, is that it's obviously so different from how it's done in the West. Basically, in the West, players basically rule the team, and usually they tend to their value within the team tends to be based on two things. Either they're like the emotional leader, like the social element, and so maybe they're the ones who get to say what happens in the team, or the other way is if you're very, very good. And if you're very, very good, it's unlikely you're ever going to get cut from the team, and you can always kind of be like safe from that, and someone else, the lowest performing player, he'll be the one who gets cut, you know. Right. But we see like a bizarre scenario where I think that there might be an extent in one way where the Korean system actually allows you to make players better or mold them more. Like, they're not having as much say in how they become. Because I was thinking of an example, okay. So if we think of the two CJ teams, so before they were like Azubu and then they were MIG before. So there was a period in time when Blaze and Frost, in theory, had like two of the best top laners in Korea. So Blaze had Reapered and then Frost had Woong. And at the time, these were considered like very good top laners. So for reasons which we won't go into now, they lose these two players because Reapered, he gets removed or he leaves or whatever, and Loco Doco, who's the AD carrier, Frost leaves or gets kicked, and so they move Woong down, and so basically both teams now need a top laner. And so both teams pick up two players who in theory are unknown, unproven, right, and inexperienced. So Blaze get Flame and Frost get Shy. And now that we've had like maybe like almost a year or so between these two moves, we can see that actually these two players that were in theory unknown, unproven, etc., might actually have been better at their peaks than the two good players they had before ever were. And yet these are like unknown players they just plucked out of nowhere. But it's like it looks like they scouted them very well. They knew, kind of had an idea of like, okay, we can maybe mold them into this sort of thing. Like, what do you think on this topic? Are there pros and cons to it?
From simply the competitive side, from like the player and management side, I think this is much better. Like you said, they're very sharp about their scouting. They make sure they monitor everything. For CJ, I know for a fact, coach on air, he used to like do our triple Q even in blind pick with his team, you know, with his players, and so that he could see other solo queuers, and so that he could find out how they played, or he would watch by their side. And then you know, and then once they start doing tryouts, it's very legitimate tryouts where not only do you have to play with the team, but especially for solo lanes, they'll run 1v1s against their remaining player, they'll make sure that you can beat them very well, and only the best guys get through. And we saw that with both Shy and Flame. Like, they performed above and beyond during their tryouts. As far as I'm told, they completely shut out whoever was remaining at the time. I think that is a lot more, and we've seen other players who had a lot of fans because they were great personalities. They weren't bad skill-wise, but then they'll get cut, or they'll get moved, or they'll leave the team for whatever reason. And you listen to the players and the management, and usually it's just a matter of, we just didn't think it was a good fit. The specifics vary, but that's what they treasure a lot more. So we see this a little bit in StarCraft too, where I feel that there are exceptions where we have people who stand way on the other end of the spectrum and they can never be touched by any team. But then there are a lot of players, the team is not as concerned about that individual. The team is concerned about whether the team performs well. It doesn't matter if this player ends up dropping out next year, as long as a teammate takes the title. And that notion from the management side is so different. It's like, oh, we lost our biggest guy who, talked really well in interviews, was funny and played well. What are we going to do? It's like, no, it doesn't matter if we lose that guy. It doesn't matter if we lose those fans, because if we take the title, this guy will have new fans now. Because Koreans, as people joke, it's like only first place matters, right? It doesn't matter if you're runner-up. You only get remembered if you're at the top. And with League of Legends, it's a lot more apparent because the team itself is 5 people. So when they cut people from the West, it's like, this makes no sense. Why would you ever do that? But then you look and they start performing well. They're, oh, that's fine. And we feel it too in the West. These teams, Frost and Blaze, they've gotten new fans, if anything, more fans now. And there are some people who still remember the days of like Reaper on Blaze, and we reminisce about that. But at the same time, we get over it because the team does well. And that's what the management understands, is that if they win and if they start performing better, then they'll trust us. And if not, we'll just modify it again. Like, it ties into the whole part where they think it's kind of like company property and like a company marketing tool. So even if they make a couple mistakes, it's okay. Like, we'll just modify it until we do become the best. We're not going to give them time just because of sentimental value. That happens very, very little, I would say. As some people might be sad about that, and sure, there's pros and cons, like you said, but that happens very little in Korean teams.
Because when we think about the idea of management removing players, the strange thing is sometimes they're not even removing them for playing badly. They're removing them because this player, the expectation is they should win, and they don't win.
Right.
So since that's the only goal, actually being amazing at second place wasn't good enough, because if they think they can get someone who can come first place, then to them it's like, well, it's obvious, just remove him and bring in the guy who maybe can get the job done.
Yeah.
And so I wanted you to talk about this mentality of like results are all that matters, but also contrast it to the West, because in the West we have a problem that I notice in League of Legends, which is like the idea of like a legacy player, where one time you were very, very good, maybe in season 1, halfway through season 2, or perhaps you're just such a star player, your showmanship element, that even if your game doesn't match that anymore, they don't want to remove you from the company because like sponsor issues, or you've got so many fans, like you're like the heart of the team. But I don't think people fully, who don't follow like OGN, realize how harsh it is. Like basically, you could be the equivalent to someone like Doublelift in NA. Okay, so in theory, Doublelift could play amazingly, and CLG might still not win LCS NA. They might finish second, they might even finish 4th, and he could actually, in theory, play amazingly. And so, because he's so good, CLG is never going to want to remove him because he's the star player. He's got all these fans. Like, that's a huge element. But in Korea, you can be like Reapered, and you can be a brilliant, brilliant player and have all this influence. And if your team just does worse than expectations, you can be out of the door tomorrow, even if you're a star player. Like, what do you think of this aspect of like how it relates between the two? Like, how results orientated is it in that sense?
Yeah, I think part of it. Yeah, part of the cause goes to the company or the management. So, we'll give good and bad causes, right? So, like, the good side is the management, if they actually have really good analysts, they're just going to be very brutal. And if they're like, you're not good enough, we have found other players who are good, then they're going to be able to take that step where, like, as people outside of the game, like, they might meet up for dinner and like laugh about it, and this guy might feel bad for his player, but during meetings he's going to be like, you're not good enough, you're getting kicked. On the bad side, there could also be cases where the analysts are just like, this guy, I can't work with this guy because he doesn't listen, we have to cut him because this is my job, and the management comes first before the players. There are those aspects, but then from the community too, right? Like, most Koreans don't remember who, you know, made it to the round of 8 or who made it to the semifinals. You only know because it's obvious because they get seeds in the next tournament. But once the season is over, all people will remember is who got first. Unless there was like a legendary match that was really blown out of proportion on media, then the media does its work. But even there's a good example, like media in Korea, esports media, most of it is just live reports. The bulk of, and then you have interviews outside of it, but even winner interviews are all just like press conferences. It's not like we get to go up individually and interview them. And so the media also doesn't get to play a role where they like really build up someone's character on their own. It's just a matter of if they're given the chance because they win. Like, we've never seen players get a chance to build character because they lost. But in the West, we're like, well, this guy seems to have a story, like, let's go find out. We have that opportunity because we have freelance journalists. But in Korea, it's like, we don't want to waste our time on interviewing this guy. We want to interview the guy who won. And so the community also just rolls into this habit of remembering only the winners. And although you may have won the round of 8, you might get knocked out. And then by that time, the only thing people remember is who took the title. And so then at that point, you then can't blame the company, because the company's like, well, now our team means nothing because our fans don't remember. Although you played very well, like, too bad, boo-hoo, no one remember us. We're going to have to get good players. So I think it's just, in a way, maybe a negative cycle where all three parties, like the management, the media, and the fans, kind of feed off of each other, but in the negative way where they don't remember the people who didn't win. And then it just goes into this endless cycle of who's going to break it? Like, who's going to take that big, bold step of being like, I want to remember the guy who lost but has a good story, and no one's going to listen to you. It's a very daring thing to do in the cycle the Korean esports scene is in right now.
So another area where we've heard all these stories about strict regime in the team houses is the practice hours. And so in Brood War, this was literally mandated. Like, what people don't necessarily know is that if you were a Kesper team, I think the figure was like 12 hours, I think it was, that you had to practice a day. And so the idea was, that means if you're the B teamer who's never getting on television, you practice 12 hours. But that means if you're Flash, you practice 12 hours. Even if you just won 3 OSLs in a row, you're going to practice 12 hours tomorrow as well, the next day, you know. That's literally how strict it was, and because it was almost like mandated in their contracts, like they had to do this. And so then some people were going above and beyond that on their own, but it means that everyone has to practice a minimum amount. Now, I'm guessing it's not as rough now in StarCraft 2 or in League of Legends. It seems a little bit more lax. But is it really the case that like they have these like set regimens where you're almost like living by their clock? Like, you wake up this time, you eat this time, you play this time, you do this, as opposed to, even when I've heard of Western teams, like I've heard like CLG practice 8 hours a day, okay, but they have sort of a thing in mind, like, okay, we'll do like roughly 2 till 10, and, you know, we'll have some food before then, and we'll, you know, there's a laxer element to it. Like, what truth is there to how strict it is?
I know for a fact, at least a couple of the Kespa teams where I got a chance to visit their team houses, it's super strict. It's just written on the board, and you know, and if the manager or the coach lives with them, it's definitely enforced, because they're the ones who are going to get up, make sure everyone's up, everyone eats at the same time, eats the same food, even snacks. So when I got to go do interviews for some of the Kespa teams, you know, so the interview is during like free time, and so some people will do like solo queue in terms of League of Legends, but even then the manager is monitoring all their activities, so he needs to know exactly where people are and if they're leaving the house for how long, for what activity. And it needs to be a constructive activity, like, I'm gonna go take out the trash. You can't be like, I'm just gonna go hang out with my friends. Like, no, like, today is not a vacation day. It doesn't matter if you have free time, you do everything for the team, you know. And it's very strictly enforced, and we saw that. This is something everyone knows. So when Ring Troll got kicked off of LGIM, it was because he didn't follow curfew. And, you know, that's just that. You don't follow curfew, that's it. Because you're not... Because there, it's not a matter of you're not obeying the superiors, but it's that you're not sacrificing the same thing as your teammates. And I'm not a huge fan of applying this everywhere, but Koreans love having this notion of, like, if everyone goes through the same pain, you're going to come out stronger. And Koreans know this too, like, they admit it. So for instance, I'll just put this out there. When you work for a big company, a lot of these companies will have training periods, right? Like, you go through education, but during that training period, they will send you to like military boot camp almost. All of them. It doesn't matter if you're, you know, a female or male. Obviously, if you're super sick, like, that's a different story. But you go through the same pains, and it's like really bad environments. You get bitten by all these mosquitoes, and then their notion of keeping that, you learn nothing about the company during this like weekend, let's say. It's not like you're getting lessons on how to conduct business or how to do market. You just go there and you do boot camp and you're getting physical training. And then their argument is, well, now that everyone has gone through the same suffering, you're going to be a much tighter group, and therefore you're going to have better synergy. Okay, on paper, maybe it makes sense. Personally, I think it's a little bit far-fetched, because a lot of times it just ends up with them coming together for their hatred for whoever implemented the system. But you see that in the teams too. So it's like, it's not because you disobeyed your teacher or your parent, it's that your teammates sacrificed their playtime. You know, your teammates sacrificed their girlfriends or their friends. Why don't you? If you are not willing to do it, what makes you special? And therefore, do you think your teammates will respect you? Do you respect your team? It comes into this whole notion of respect and synergy and unification, and so, or unity rather. So, you know, Ring Troll gets kicked out, and we've seen that with other teams where players have been warned or replaced because of these issues. And like you said, it's much more prevalent in Kespa teams. For instance, Najin's Sword for League of Legends, when they won the Winter Championship, they, I believe, got 2 weeks of vacation, which is like unheard of for any other Kespa team. Even if you win a title, you get like a weekend. But then you immediately saw the effect when there was Club Masters, that the Najin teams were not the same. And it's not because they necessarily got worse, it's because everyone else was practicing 10 hours a day for 2 weeks. You know, it adds up. That's almost 200 hours that you didn't practice. It makes a huge difference, because these guys are still going through same clockwork. Wake up at the same time, go to sleep at the same time. And for better or worse, that is how it's done, especially in Kespa. Even during the WCS Season 1 finals this time around, when we talked to Solkey and asked about his teammate SOS, because he was like, oh, SOS is a bit of a rebel, and we're like, how? He's like, well, like, if curfew time comes, like, he'll go up and like turn the light on just to go to the bathroom or something. And like, that's a level of rebellion within the teams, because it's like, no, you must, even if you go to the bathroom, you have to be like super quiet and respect all your teammates going to sleep. And when I heard that, it was funny, but then I was like, wow, that's, and he just said it like it wasn't a big deal. Like, that's just how it is. That's what we need to do to win. And I was like, okay, it's a very different culture than what most people are used to, I think.
Because like, I think an interesting side effect of this strictness is that some of the people in the West who aren't maybe aware of how strict it is, they're like imagining that it would be great if we could replicate this in the West. And even if we ignore the cultural differences, I get the feeling, like, I once made a comment when someone asked me, so they asked me a question in like an obvious way. They said, okay, so what can like foreigners do to become like Koreans in StarCraft or something? And so, to be a bit flippant, it might have sounded like I was being glib, because I said, well, I don't think that they would want to. And they were thinking, well, what do you mean? That's not even like how you could answer the question. But when I described it, I said it like this, okay. So when I gave the example before, if you're Flash, you still have to practice all these hours. Even if you win the title, you still, tomorrow you're going to be coming in practice again. So I thought of it like this. If you're the best player ever in anything in the West, any good job, any sport, even esports, your idea is that you want to get all the spoils for winning. And so the idea is, if you're the best, you want to then dictate your practice hours. You want to have all the money, you want to have an awesome girlfriend, a great car. That's like the dream, is you get everything because of your success. But the problem is, it sounds like a lot of that stuff isn't going to happen if you're the Korean pro gamer, because actually even the best guy, he's sort of limited to the same things as the worst guy. He's got the same strict stuff enforced on him. And I've heard these stories where there were Korean pro gamers in LoL who said to Western pro gamers, like, oh, I'm so jealous of your lifestyle. Yeah. And then the Western gamer was like, what are you talking about? Like, your team's way better than mine. Like, I'm struggling because my team's not doing very well. And he's like, no, but you can like make all the streaming money. You've got a girlfriend. You can have free time. And this player was in one of the best teams in Korea. So they would think this is crazy. And I've heard these stories as well, right? I'll give you an example where I had a dinner with a Korean LoL player while I was here. And so the person who set it up was like, oh, he's going to come about like 8 o'clock. And I was like, okay, why isn't he here now? And he's like, oh, that's when practice finishes. I was like, oh, okay. So then he comes for dinner, and we're having the Korean barbecue, and, you know, people stay for a few hours. And then at about 10 o'clock, he's like, I have to go back to the house now. We're like, just stay for longer. He's like, no, that's the end of my free time. And so he came for 2 hours. The rest of us were all there the whole time, you know. And I also heard another example where in an interview, Faker, the star player for SK Telecom T2, he actually said that he was like, when he was asked about what players he was friends with from other teams, he said, "Oh, our coach doesn't allow us to add players from other teams to our friends list in game." Which, if you're from the West, this sounds like you can't even comprehend this, you know. So, like, what do you think of this element? Like, is it the case? Like, what can be replicated in the West, and what wouldn't they want to? Because I get the sense people, if they really knew that was what they were signing up for, no one would sign up for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I used to be 100% with you on, yeah, I don't think anyone in the West would want to. And I don't think it's necessary per se, you know? Like, we see players in the West who are living just fine. And if anything, they're having fun. And at least for the time being, like, I don't know how it's going to work out 10 years down the road. But for now, that's not bad. Like, I have nothing against it. I think that's great that you're enjoying what you're doing. But, yeah, if we were talking for the scene itself, for esports to be recognized and for esports to grow as a profession, I think at least having the discipline. But here's why. It only works out in Korea, like I said with the Najin sword example, because everyone else does it. So when you don't do it, you feel the consequence. Like, you see it right away. You're like, oh crap, if I want to stay in the game, like, I better pick it back up and practice 12 hours a day. Versus in America, say like 2 teams started doing it, they might get far in the beginning because they have like really good discipline on their own. But then if they, you know, if they're like, oh, well, I'm sick of this, I want to take a break, and they take a break, they come back the next week and they still win because, you know, if you've practiced 12 hours a day for 6 months and other teams haven't, it's gonna go quite a while. Like, you're gonna be able to go by just kind of cruising through it, and then it's very easy for you to fall back into this habit of, okay, I don't need to try that hard. So why did I do that? And you can't blame the player at that point, because it's just not a fair experiment, because you can't replicate the entire environment at once. You can't say, let's have a thing like KESPA, an association where we have 10 teams or 8 teams that all have similar practice schedules, and then let's see what happens. Then the players, if you find the right people who have the discipline to begin with, which I think exists, right? Obviously, it's a very they're very diverse people. Then those people will drive themselves because their competitors are in the same situation. But right now, you know, if you take a player or a team and you're like, start practicing 10 hours a day, they might do it in the beginning. They might win, you know, whatever, like, season champion. But then if they take a break and they don't feel the consequence, who can blame them? That's where I think it's almost impossible. Obviously not 100%, but I don't think it's realistic to implement that system. I think the best we can hope for in the West is as things go more global, if the players themselves feel the drive and we find these people who care more about the end result, than the journey, then these people will always aim for, whenever there's an international tournament, right? They'll aim for like the MLGs, the DreamHacks, or the World Championships. So even if they're facing only European or North American players for the next 3 months, their goal is, well, I need to always compare myself with these recordings that I'm watching from Korea and China, and that's how I'll do it. And then I have to practice on their servers, even if my ping is bad. Things like that, where you find ways to remind yourself of what the goal is, rather than saying, I'm just going to try that system in my environment, because your environment doesn't need it. You can be the best without practicing 10 hours a day.
Because another factor that plays into this as well is that, using a LoL specific example here, okay, so one of the great things for a good player in League of Legends is the idea that outside of tournament results, you can get rich from streaming. So in NA particularly, this is the huge thing, you know. Every star player almost that you can think of in League of Legends in NA is also a lot streaming star, and they make a lot of money, they have a lot of fans watching. But actually in the Korean side, and a byproduct of their structure is that some of them either don't stream at all, or it's just not really like an income revenue type thing. And so in terms of making money and being successful, it's going to come from either winning the tournament, which is very, very hard, and only one team can do it each season, or your salary. And so what happened was, in KESPA Brood War, this was kind of offset by the idea that, okay, so yeah, you are owned by the team and they make you play the team league and practice all day long, etc., but you got a really sick salary compared to like pro gaming standards. And so we heard figures of like Flash making like $300,000 a year, and if you were a star player you could make like over 100 grand. But there were even players who were like one of the like the good team league player who could make like 80,000 or 100,000. So he was still getting like reimbursed pretty decently. So what I wanted to know was, that was in Brood War though, when they had the big sponsor injections, etc. So realistically, in League of Legends, like obviously you can't tell us specific like numbers, but can you give us like ballparks on what like a star player in like a top Korean LoL team could be making, and what like the average player who's in the OGN season maybe makes? Like, can you give us ballparks of like what do you think it's like?
This is like rough guesses because I actually really just don't know, but I would say, you know, the top teams and the top players, they would make, you know, near 100 grand, if not more, especially if they have like really good sponsors, or, you know, the KESPA sponsors. I would say even the worst, as long as they're picked up by a sponsor, I would say maybe some of them get like an annual salary of, you know, maybe anywhere from like between 20 to 40 grand. The thing here though is that, say they make even less than 20, of course in Korea, like a gaming house is very common for even smaller sponsors. So once you get a gaming house, your living is taken care of. So a lot of the cost goes out. The big difference here though, and I'm waiting to see how this works out in North America too, but even back in Brood War, when we were told that players were making ridiculous amounts of money playing games, you know, we don't hear much about what some of these players are doing now, unless they're still playing or coaching. And that's how a lot of them found ways to sustain themselves, right? But the ones who didn't, but were decent, were like, where did they go? Like, what are they doing now? And it was maybe in February, there was an article, I forget which player, but an article about a Brood War player who 10 years down the road now was actually just doing delivery and then being one of the guys who like was a sign outside for a restaurant. Okay. And it was like, what are you doing? What did you do with all your money? I thought you got paid well. I thought you won a couple of tournaments. Like, what happened? And the guy was like, let's just be straight up. When you're a professional player in Korea, you're either in your late teens or early 20s. First of all, you have no notion of financial responsibility, and you're playing games, so your money goes into how to play the game better, whether it's the food or the gear or other titles, you know, whatever it is, it's to make you play the game better. So you keep using it, because when you're playing, you're not like, oh, I'm gonna save this money and like open a business 10 years down the road. That's not the goal. The goal is to win again next year. So you have to pour in everything you got to improve yourself the next year. So you end up with not much once you quit. So the best way to sustain yourself is to stay in the field, whether it's as a caster, an analyst, whatever it is. And a lot of players have found that way now, but that means that there's a lot who haven't. And, you know, I kind of worry about that both in Korea and the West. And the West, I'm interested because, like you said, the streaming aspect is very new. It's very different. It is something theoretically that can go longer than an actual competitive career. But at the same time, that too, if you have to stop for whatever reason, what's left for you, you know? And when you're streaming, you use that money to get better streaming gear, get a better computer. You know, you keep doing it because it's what you enjoy, and your fans, you know, like donate to you, they give you gear and stuff. But again, even that, it's like it all goes into having like a better sleep schedule for your viewers, not for yourself. You invest all of this into the current job. What happens afterwards? I mean, I don't know. So while Korean players may have made a lot more, I think in the long run, not much is different than it is in the West right now.
Because this also plays into another weird aspect where in pro gaming, like when I think of, like my basis was obviously European esports. And so the way you made your money there was from prize money. Mm-hmm. And so basically, if someone was the best team or a top team, then if the sponsor allows it, like they have the money, they're going to try and like ensure they make a lot by attending as many tournaments as possible. So it's trying to take like as many shots on goal as possible. Like you might not win this one, but you make them third. The next one you might win. And so as an aggregate, you're going to make some good money. And so it was just taken for granted that if you can attend a tournament, you will. And it definitely, people even looked to get onto teams where they would have more options to go to tournaments because this is what they wanted to do, you know. But I've noticed a bizarre scenario where the specific team I'm going to list here is Frost, where basically there was a 6-month span in 2012 where for sure Frost would have been in everyone's top 5 in the world. And yet they attended one tournament outside of Korea, which was the World Championships. So at these other tournaments, you know, the same organization sends Blaze, Najin Sword goes to some of these tournaments, and these teams all do very well. They finish top 3s at these tournaments, they're winning these tournaments. And so there's maybe like 100 grand's worth of first prize money first place prize money that like you could say that Frost might have left on the table. You know, like they could have gone, even if they hadn't won, there'd be a lock for a top 4 or a top 3. So is there a reason, can you give us, to why like some team who's amazing like this wouldn't just go and try and win what sounds like free money almost? Like it sounds like it plays into like the element where they're so controlling and like a bit secretive. Like what is this about?
Well, they're definitely secretive. Whether that's, you know, I think a lot of it is legitimate worries, but for instance, when they went to IEM, when both CJ teams attended IEM, I remember the coach asking me, he was like, hey, can you ask them if we can deny the like player cam for our teams and the player communication? Because while sure it's in Korean, they're worried about other Koreans. You know, they're not worried about like CLG or TSM hearing it. They're worried about, you know, Najin hearing it and KT hearing it. And he was like, because that was right before the season championships for champions. And so he was like, I mean, we're still going to attend, we're still going to compete, but it'd be great if they could, because, you know, we might want to try some things here that we're working on for the champions finals. And if they hear our thought process, then they can break down, you know, then the worry is not that they know that strategy, but they can break down the direction that the CJ team is headed. And so then they can expect a lot more. So there's that worry for sure, you know, keeping things hidden. Then there's the concern of the sponsors, especially Kespa. They're worried about their branding within Korea. So while sure, like from the West, we might think, well, hey, if say like CG or KT gets known in the West, you know, that's not bad, right? But then the companies here are like, sure, people knowing us is great, but that's not what makes us the money. The money we make is by people buying our products within Korea. And so we will stick here. And especially with companies like CJ, yeah, I mean, Samsung is a good example where they have a lot more global presence. But, you know, KT it's a Korean mobile company. Like, they're not going to care if people in America know them or not. So the esports management might argue that their players need to go out so that they can get more fans. But the company is going to be worried about, does our team win the Korean tournament or not? I think that plays into a lot more role. And then there's the notion of how they split up prize money, which I have no concrete idea, but I would say it's a lot less than it is in the West. Because the salary is a lot higher. Yeah, okay. Because the salary tends to be higher. So it's a lot more about, again, you being an employee rather than you working for your own good. I put all those together, I think, from their perspective, it makes a lot of sense not to attend as many tournaments. Of course, at the time with Frost, I know a lot of other people were just looking for the other teams because they had more of a splash. Like, you know, Blaze had just beaten Frost at the spring champions for Korea. But yeah, I think more than like the secrecy, I think the sponsorship actually plays a big role, because these guys are sponsored by strictly, you know, Korean companies or the Korean department, you know, the domestic department of said company. And so the management has no concern over whether they're represented well outside of the country. But then you look at teams who are sponsored by, say, Razer. You know, they're a global company. They sell their products equally globally, and so they're very concerned about going wherever they can, like you said. That doesn't exist. You know, even the sub-sponsors are all you know, like Korean companies, say like Zenix. You know, you don't see Zenix products out in the US or the West or the, you know, Europe. It's only in Korea. And so the management, while they can agree, they might personally agree and be like, yeah, it'd be great if you got known as a player in Germany, but what does that mean to us? What if you go there and then you lose practice time and you get tired because of the jet lag and you come back and you can't win the title in Korea? Like, the risk is too high. And so I think that's one of the bigger reasons why they don't attend.
Because this actually, some of what you're saying there plays into another topic I wanted to talk about, which is the idea of like long-term planning, even like in-game things. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think this exists even in League of Legends to the same degree. It sounds like, when I think of like team sports in the West of esports, it tends to be more like you're more worried about like your overall form. So you use your practice and you use maybe even some run-up tournaments to try and get into peak form, and then when the big tournament comes, you just want to be really good. And your strategies are almost like a side element of that. They're like a weapon in your arsenal, but they don't have to be like super incredibly refined. You can change some of them overnight or coming up to the tournament. Whereas I notice from what I've read, at least, I want to confirm this, is like Koreans seem to place a way more of a premium on the notion of like, okay, I'm going to like refine these incredible strategies, but then I have to get the maximum value out of them. So I don't want to just throw them away on something small. And so I heard a similar example like the Frost one, but in StarCraft 2, where the same thing happened where, okay, so MVP was the best player ever in StarCraft 2. The actual number of foreign tournaments he's attended is very low. And so part of the reason why wasn't just that he was always in GSL, because if he's in GSL, you can understand why he'd practice for GSL instead of going to MLG. But even if he got knocked out early, sometimes he'd stay and he'd be working for the next GSL or something. And I once read something in an interview that went along the lines of like, well, if he ever gets put in a position where he's like working on some really good shit in private, in practice, then the problem with going to an MLG is that you have to play so many games to win the tournament that people will see every single type of strategy, because you have to use them all like to claw and win the tournament, you know. Whereas instead, if he's in GSL, if he plays this one next opponent, he's going to use some strategies for him, but then he's got some saved up for the next guy he's going to use, and then maybe he's got something brilliant he's thinking of for the guy in the final. And so he's actually getting maximum value out of all his strategies here, because he might not even play like a Zerg until the final or something, but if he goes to MLG, for sure he's going to play some Zerg at some point. He's going to have to use his good stuff. And so you get this weird scenario where basically like it's like the idea is like they're putting more of a premium on this way of planning for the game. Like do you see this as something of, is it a Korean thing in culture? Like where does this come from, do you think?
Is it a Korean thing? Maybe a little bit. I definitely wouldn't say it's specific. It's very unique to Korea. I don't think it's like from Korean history or something of that nature. But it can, I can assume that it comes partly again from, academics is such a big thing in Korea, right? So you only get recognized if you're first in your school, and you only get recognized if you therefore go to the best university. And to get there, it takes a long time and a lot of work, and you never, even if you're, say, a brilliant musician, it's like, well, do I spend this time and like maybe forego this one semester? Like, no, because what if, this one semester, like, what if that's what counts at the end? What if you lose by like 0.1 on your GPA? And things of that nature, and then you bring it into esports, again, it's, like you said, it's a matter of where they place their priority, I would say. So in academics, it's like they place priority on the school score and then your test score. So in esports, they place a priority on the domestic tournaments. Because that is because their biggest fans are in Korea, and the tournament that their fans care most about is the one in Korea. And same with their sponsors, same with their management. And so it doesn't matter if the player really wants to go out and get fans from America and play at MLG and hold like the MLG trophy. The point of the matter is, sure, the American fans are great, and a lot of players nowadays, they are expanding. They care a lot more about their global fans, but especially back in the day, say during the early days of StarCraft 2 even, it's like, how often are you going to communicate with your fans in America if you're a player from Korea? You rarely get it, especially because of the language barrier. There's not that opportunity. So is it worth it to go there for that one thrill and then come back and have to claw your way all the way back up, like you said, going through so many more games? The extent of this, though, here's a good example of how quote-unquote paranoid Korean players are about this, is when I was at All-Stars, Cloud Templar for League of Legends for CJ and Frost was alongside me as a guest analyst. And so during the semifinals of the All-Stars event, Ambition, who was a mid laner for CJ and Blaze, was on the Korean All-Star team, and he started playing Kennen, who's a champion we've never seen him play, especially in his lane. And Cloud Templar was joking. He was like, maybe Ambition is playing Kennen to throw off the Chinese team, because they have to play China in the finals if they move on. So maybe they're just kind of disrespecting their opponents now, playing Kennen to throw them off, get a free ban, and then so that Ambition can play whoever he wants, open up more slots. And then he was joking, and then near the end of the cast, Cloud Templar started joking about how he was worried because he had to face, his team, Frost, had to face their sister team, Blaze, in the semifinals when they came back to Korea. And Cloud Templar was like, well, now what if we have to worry about Kennen? Like, what if we have to ban it because he played really well? And he was it was half in jest, but then after the broadcast, Cloud Templar was saying, he goes, now I'm actually worried, because I said that all as a joke, but when I think about it, this could very well be this huge mind game by Ambition to just throw everyone, off balance and then take a free win. I don't know what to think. This is very scary, and it was even confirmed because after the matches, when the Korean All-Star team took the All-Star Championship, Ambition admitted, he was like, yeah, I played Kennen because I wanted China to ban it so that I could play someone else. It was just all part of the plan. I never practiced Kennen. And you know, so you think about that and you're like, well, maybe Cloud Templar is paranoid, but then maybe not, because Ambition was planning at least some portion of that. So you never know, because it's just this cycle of players clawing a little bit and taking whatever method they can to win and to know more and to play mind games with the other team, that it can, you know, it's only understandable that players become paranoid about strategies and about what other people know, because you don't know what to expect. The level of interest that other teams have about their rivals is so much higher than what we're used to seeing, at least as a community in the West.
Because one of the things about how the teams practice that seems to be different, both in League of Legends and StarCraft, is that Koreans also seem to place a premium on making sure that your fundamentals are very, very strong. Mm-hmm. And so this actually doesn't exist in the same way in the West. We have a bizarre scenario where if someone is a very good player, we let him just slouch on that if he wants. He can just go like I mean, Doublelift openly says, like, I never play solo queue, I think it's trash, like, I don't care. Whereas like a lot of these players who are in Korea, even if they're top pros, they have drills that I've heard they have to do. And so in League of Legends, it might be like last hitting or something. Or in StarCraft, obviously, there are certain like a stutter step you can do with the Marines to get good. And so a famous example I remember of when I first noticed this was in Brood War, when Mutalisk Micro was invented, where you bunch them together. Now, before we heard about this scenario of what the Koreans were doing, the way you'd practice that if you were a Western player is you'd play the game, and whenever you'd happen to build Mutalisks, that's when you'd practice it by doing it, just playing basically, and you'd indirectly be practicing it. Well, Korea just instantly figures out, okay, this is a really useful micro trick, so they build a map where all you do is you do Mutalisk Micro, and then you destroy Scourge, and like, they just practice that map all the time, and supposedly all the Zergs would just practice that every day to make sure their Mutalisks were like godlike. And so obviously you're getting like a way more intense version of practice of that one thing than if you just play games and it happens to arise in those games. And so in League of Legends, I've heard these other like almost mythical stories. Like there's this one about Mad Life where people say that his Blitzcrank, the reason it's like above everyone else is because he has some secret client where, or version of the game where either someone can control the minion waves, or you know, something like this, like, or they can set them differently. Like, are there really like methods that we possibly don't even know about in Korea? Like, what's going on here that they can do all this secret shit?
I mean, I'm positive there isn't like a secret client, of course, okay. But you know, this is one of the biggest advantages of having a sister team is that you can set up custom games, agree to do certain builds or certain team comps, at least in League of Legends, and then quit out before you save the history in your match history, and that way you can safely practice that. And then so I know the CJ players the most just because they're the ones I met first when I was in America. I know with them it's not as enforced because the players have actually taken it upon themselves to do these drills for fun. Okay. You know, it's kind of for fun. They're like, especially Flame, who is probably the newest member in the CJ lineup, he's like, every day he's like, hey, you want a 1v1? And it's not always shy. He's like, Cloud Templar, want a 1v1? You know, hey, you know, Woon, you want a 1v1? And he would just 1v1 everyone because you never know who you're going to go up against, and you know, they might be better at some other methods. And you're just always 1v1ing, and it's not like, hey, let's go all the way and break the Nexus. It's like whoever gets first blood, or 5 minutes, whoever has better CS. It's these very short literal drills where you just practice that one mechanic. And I saw this at the WCS Season 1 Finals for StarCraft 2, where before the games, you know, we had the players' individual monitor screens in our feed for the sub-stage, and everyone had different methods of practicing, but we mentioned this on stream too, because we were so in awe of how SOS would warm up was simply by laying out force fields. But obviously we were in awe of his speed and his precision, but all he would do was lay out force fields from a corner and just put concentric force fields all the way around in 3 rows and then erase, 3 rows and erase. And he was just doing that until the game started, nothing else, because again, like for Protoss and StarCraft 2, force fields are so crucial. And like you said, with Mutas back in Brood War. So they pick out that core element and they're like, well, if I can master this, then like the build order or what unit I build, that's all supplemental. You know, that's all part of the creative side. But most likely, I'm always going to have to use a force field at some point in the game. Might as well make it perfect. And we're watching him, and at first we were just like, wow, this guy's really fast and really precise. But then I was watching him, and he did this every game without fail until the game started. That's all he was doing. And I was just like, that's probably how he practices at home too. You know, before he plays any ladder games or before he scrims, he's like, well, I'm gonna lay out my force fields for about the next 10 minutes, and then I'm gonna go into a game. And like I said, with League of Legends, these guys do drills on their own. Mad Life has transcended humanity, and now he runs simulations in his head, he claims, which I can't even imagine how that's done every day. But, you know, and then he does that, and then he puts it in play in games. Like, he'll always pick, you know, just one champion. Even if they're solo queuing, they'll always just pick that one champion for so long, and they'll strictly use whatever item build, regardless of if the other it fits the other team. Because the creative side, you can do that in scrims when you're actually doing scrims with other teams as a team. Strategy, all of that, we can think about it together. It doesn't have to be habit if you have good communication and you have good, you know, hierarchy. But mechanics, like you said, has to be muscle memory. So then it's like, well, if I build this item, my mechanics have to be this way in League of Legends. Or if I use this unit, my mechanics have to be this way in StarCraft. And so I see that a lot with the Korean players when I watch them warming up. When I watched CJ Blaze, back then they were still Azubu, going to MLG, I believe it was at Dallas, and Captain Jack was warming up. So here's a really good example. McNoon and so Najin Sword and Blaze were both there. When McNoon was warming up, he was just like bouncing around the map as Nidalee, and he was still, you know, practicing last hitting or practicing hitting spears, but it was much more nonchalant. It was more to just get his muscles relaxed, while we saw Captain Jack warming up, and he would always warm up as Ashe, although he wasn't playing Ashe that much at that time, and he would always just practice last hitting, but then also always practice turning on his frost arrows at the right time and off so that he wouldn't consume any mana. And he was just doing these mechanics, and then he would throw volleys around now and then to make sure his mouse precision was correct, but he wouldn't do anything else. He wouldn't like walk around the map and go to different lanes. It was just going back and forth amongst the minion wave, making sure that his mouse control was precise and his stutter stepping was entirely as he wanted it to be. And I think that's a big difference. I think McNoon is a good example of how any player, even at home, right, when we're like, I want to play a game, we think about, well, I want to get relaxed. Like, I want to make sure I can move my wrist or my hands fast enough. But we don't think about, I want to build up the muscle memory in the 5 minutes before I go into a game so that it stays there. And that's the different mentality of a lot of the Korean players.
Because I think a key practice element that you've already mentioned is the concept of the sister team. Because basically, from my perspective, that's like the League of Legends answer to the practice environment that the Brood had. Because the secret that people didn't know about the Brood War players who only watched the pro scene was, the best example of this, is when Team 8 existed. So all these players who actually were very good Team League players, they get disbanded from their teams, like Oz and other teams, like I think it was a Heights Barkies, these sorts of teams that had all disbanded, and they all go into this one team. So on paper, you're going like, well, this is a sick lineup. Like, even if they haven't got sponsors, they're going to do so well. No, they did absolutely terrible. And the reason why is because that's all the players they had, was just the A team, basically. But every Kesper team has the B team, and then they even have practice partners. So the idea is, part of how you get like the stud of your team in shape is you use specific practice partners or specific B team players, and they have to sort of sacrifice their game to just like do whatever you need to become good for your match. You know, they're going to mimic a certain opponent, they're going to play one style against you over and over and over. And so again, it's a way of getting practice where you're not just playing other good players, where a byproduct of playing good players is you will improve, but you're kind of trying to focus in on one thing and get really, really, really good there. And so what would be the equivalent of this in League of Legends? It wouldn't work the same way to just have one player live in your house and then he practices with everyone. So it seems like the equivalent idea was have two teams, and then they can practice each other, and then also they can share information on who they play. So the problem is, built from that perspective, it makes absolute sense to have two teams. But the real issue I've noticed is you can no longer get any Korean player in an interview to admit that the second team was ever the B team. Originally, we were all told these were the B teams. But the problem is, some of those B teams are now better than the original team. Like Najin Sword was like the better team. SK Telecom, the Judgment Day, was better than Terminator was. Blaze has been better than Frost now. And so now it's no longer like, you look a bit stupid if you say that's your B team and they're beating the A team. Like, what do you think of this as like a core concept, like the A team and the B team, like bringing in that initial aspect? And was it true that really these were A and B teams initially, but now they just don't say it because both teams do well? What do you think of those two topics?
For one, I think having sister teams, whether A or B or not, where you can manipulate the practice regimen, I think that's very important. So even if you don't have like a second team, if you have dedicated practice partners, like you said, which is much easier, I think, to find in StarCraft because it is a 1v1 game, but you have practice partners who you can request, hey, do this build or use these items, and that's how we're going to try it, and I'm going to always find different counters, and you trust their level of skill. I think that's very important because that way you don't have to rely on random opponents to give you a chance to try something out, or you don't have to rely on like trying it on AI who you've transcended way, you know, in the past. Whether they exist as A or B, I mean, let's take Frost and Blaze as a good example. Blaze used to be the team that would always scrim outside teams. Frost was never allowed to scrim anyone outside, and that was because they would use Blaze to scout other teams, and then Blaze would mimic those teams so that Frost could practice in 100% secrecy and not let anyone know what they were preparing. Because Blaze would scrim so many different teams that even the opponents didn't know who they were going to mimic against Frost during sister practices. And like you said, I don't know if anyone now would admit that. I think Frost and Blaze is a unique example where they kind of hint at it because it's so crucial, because that, I guess, ego, if you want to put it in a little bit strong word, remains among the Blaze members, where they're like, I can't believe we used to be treated as like a second team. We're going to prove that we still are better than Frost. And, you know, they've done that time and time again, actually, ever since they were formed. But it still remains a year after their formation. And that just speaks to perhaps how much they disliked that treatment. You know, they wanted more respect, but they still went through with it because, you know, it was a job they wanted, and they wanted to stick with it, and they were given a chance to enter the tournament. But even now, when that is no longer the case for both Frost and Blaze, you see this concept where Blaze players feel like they always need to, you know, one up Frost. And Frost is like, well, I just want to win the tournament. Like, if I have to beat Blaze, like, that's fine. But Frost, I just want to win the title. Blaze is like, well, I'm going to beat Frost more than anything, and then win the title. And yeah, when Blaze used to do that method, everyone was kind of surprised because no one had ever thought about doing that, using your second team as like a scout and then mimicking other teams so that you could prepare. You know, that's not something you expect. And, you know, that's another option you can have as sister teams or practice partners. So I think more than anything, it gives you a lot of options in how to prepare for your future matches, and that can only be good. So practice partners or sister teams, I think, is always a benefit.
So one of the big issues about Koreans, like actual native Koreans, that was always mentioned in StarCraft 2, was people would complain. One of the reasons they claimed they didn't like to watch MLGs if it was all Koreans is because they said it took like the fan element out, because if a Korean won, then the interview was boring and he didn't have much showmanship, and people who were rude would be like they have no personality, they're just mindless robots playing the game. And so taking out any racist elements that could be inferred there, it is true to some degree that some of these people, compared to their counterpart star player in the West, they didn't understand Western showmanship. Okay, so you can tell me now, like, whether in Korea there's a different way of doing showmanship or way of showing your personality. But I noticed the interesting example was every time a player who was a native Korean actually moved to the West, so I'm thinking of like Violet in StarCraft 2, MC's been to a lot of Western tournaments. He picked up on it really quickly. But now even someone like Polt has also developed this. It seems like as long as they have enough exposure, they eventually get it. Like, they just become like, they do showmanship. They know how to give interviews and stuff. Like, is there something different about how Koreans approach that showmanship or showing your personality? And like, can everyone just learn like this? Could everyone do what they did, and would it work the same way?
I mean, of course not everyone. I think there are some personality differences, but it's an underlying culture thing where being overly modest is respected. And so even just like amongst friends, sure, like if you're really good buddies and you're like college students, then yeah, you're gonna say whatever you want. You're gonna trash talk each other all day. But say if you meet up with a family friend and you're like, oh, so, you know, how's your new job? And say you're making like millions and you're having the time of your life, you're just like, oh, I'm doing quite well. End of the story. Like, you don't have to elaborate, because then it might sound like bragging. Like, there's a lot of precaution taken to not sound arrogant, which in turn from the West sometimes is viewed as arrogance, because you're like, oh, well, geez, like, oh, you don't even practice. But what they're trying to say is not that they disrespected their opponent. They're just like, I'm just doing my best. That's all they want to say, because they don't want to be like, well, I sacrificed my life, and they don't want to sound like they're asking for pity or bragging, and that caution runs through the entire culture regardless of esports. And so it comes out when they do interviews. And Koreans know this too. At OGN too, we often worry, we're like, well, our interview might not be good, even if it's in 100% Korean, because this guy, he never gives fun answers, because he just follows the strict protocol on how to give answers and how to give respected answers to the mass public. And the interview is very quiet. You give one-word answers. And now that I'm doing translations, people worry for me, because they're like, well, now your job's hard, because how are you going to translate a yes? Like, you can't make it any more fun. And I noticed that when I came out here. At first, I used to think, because like you said, we would see players like MC who traveled so much. Then there might be some lost in translation. But now that I'm here and I see the bulk of the Korean players, I'm like, this is just throughout the entire community. It's not just that these players who go out have personality issues. These guys are so used to just being like that when they're amongst their friends with their coaches. They're like, oh, I'm doing okay. No, rarely will you say someone be like, how are you? And you're like, oh, I'm doing great, fantastic, I'm having the time of my life. It's not an answer you hear that often, even if they are. They're like, oh, I'm doing okay, because they're very cautious. And they're like, well, what if this guy's not having a good time? And you see a lot in interviews. But like you said, MC pulled some of these players that go out and experience that. MVP even now, much better now that he's performing a lot in Europe. I think they pick up on it. I mean, these guys, a lot of them are younger, and you can't help but imagine that in that age, I guess, span, they want to have fun. You want to jab at your friends, because when people in Korea too, when you go to the PC cafes with your friends, like I go to a PC cafe, you're gonna hear people absolutely just trash talk their friends and call them all sorts of things you would never call each other on TV, but they're having fun. That kind of drive and that kind of, I guess it's part of like their competitive nature, right, exists at this age. I'm sure they want to express it. It's just that it's not accepted in Korea, and they're okay with that because they grew up here. But if they're given the chance in America or Europe where it's accepted and they catch on to it, I imagine that a lot of these players would do just fine personality-wise out in the West.
Because actually a direct personal trend that I want to get your take on, it's split into two sections, okay? So when people do say in the West, oh, they always usually use the best players, or they look like just like compassionless robots, like they're not afraid of anything. There is an extent to which I think there's something to this. I want to know if it's something Korean, because if I think of like some of the best players of all time in all these games, so like let's pick like Mad Life, MVP, and Flash. So for their games, perhaps the best player. These players, there's something about when they play that like they look like nothing shakes them, not just on their face, but in terms of their composure in game. They can do incredible comebacks. And it doesn't seem like it's just a confidence issue. Not that they just pump themselves up or whatever. They just somehow they can just roll with everything. They don't get emotionally tossed to sea, as it were. But then there's also another component similar to that I want to ask about as well, which is that it's not just experience, though, I don't think, doing this, because I've also noticed a trend in Korea that doesn't exist in the West, where the number of people who are 15 or 16 who win the biggest championship you can win in an esports game, there's a lot of them. There's maybe like 10 people I could list off who've won a championship when they were 15 or 16 years old. In the West, if you're 15 or 16, even if you're amazing, that's when nerves destroy you, and that's when you need the years and years of experience, and you usually win the title when you're about 18 or something. So is there some cultural thing involved here? Like, what, am I like exaggerating it too much by picking two good examples and most people aren't like that? What do you think?
Man, I actually don't know if it's cultural. I think it's how they're trained. Because if you look at pop culture in Korea, like the fandom is crazy, and younger stars like therefore get swept away by it, and for better or worse. In esports, I think it's because the management will tell them that, in a way, to put it drastically, let's just put it simply, they kind of brainwash them, and they're like, well, this fandom is not meaningful. So okay. I can only imagine. But the way sometimes we see new players get escorted out, whether they win or lose from tournaments, if it's not the finals, they just leave right away as soon as all their duties are done with interviews on air, and they just disappear. And I can only imagine that's because the coaches don't want these guys to get shaken up before the ultimate goal is reached, which is like the full title, right? So if it's OSL, like the OSL title or champions, and I think that's true because we've seen players show so much emotion once they win the actual tournament, right? Like people have completely broken down on stage for the OSL and champions too. We saw Mad Life showing tears and smiling super bright after winning the trophy and getting to hold it against COGU. We see this. I think it's because it's so engraved in their brain that it's like, oh, I won the semifinals. It was a tough game. I had 3 comebacks. Great. And we hear this in interviews where people, it sounds cocky, but they're like, well, I had to win. It was a necessity for me to win the ultimate title, so why would I feel emotion? Like, this is just a requirement for me to win the whole championship. And I think it's not that they're being arrogant or it's not that they're mindless. It's just that is literally the priority for them, is nothing matters if I don't win the title. Therefore, winning the semifinals, no matter how hard it was, if I win it, great. If I don't, that stinks. The how is irrelevant once it's over. So I think that's a big reason, because we've seen people show emotion and we've seen people admit that they don't think much of the lesser rounds, and it's not because they think it's easy. It's because it doesn't mean anything to them if they win it, because if they win it and get knocked out the next, who cares?
So since a lot of my questions about the Korean cultural aspect have been kind of like directed, trying to get you to go in a specific area, I figure since you've got this like unique position of having so much experience of both scenes and knowing like the context of both, I wanted to ask like an open-ended question here, which is basically, is there a good story or a certain trend that you've noticed where this would seem really strange maybe about esports or gaming in Korea, that either Westerners don't know or they have misinterpreted in a really weird way in their own, by, you know, through the lens of their culture? Is there something that you can think of, like a good story or just something about the scene that would fit this bill, like that from your experience from both scenes?
I think a lot of it I've touched upon. For instance, I think a great one that most people don't know is how Koreans think that if you share pain, like it's gonna come out no matter what in a better sense. And I mean, I haven't experienced as much of it because the time span that I was in America is where a lot of that would be implemented during like your teens and your adolescence. But in terms of for esports, let's see. Man, I don't know.
Like, can you give me, if you don't have a set one, maybe like just a weird story, like you don't have to name the player or whatever, but something talking to a player backstage, or the way that teammates interact in a way that we would never imagine in the West that this could be like this.
Oh, so yeah, I mean, when I speak with players who have girlfriends, even if it's publicly known, they'll acknowledge it, but it's like they're filling out a check mark. It's like, do you have a girlfriend? Yes. It's like, do they have a personality? Like, don't you want to, if you're like dating someone, don't you want to talk about them? And you can tell they're not even trying to hold it back because their coach told them. It's just like, I have a girlfriend. That's that. Like, why do you, it's almost as if like, why do you care? Like, why are you asking? And it's very weird because a lot of times the players too, their teammates won't like tease them about it unless they're directly given an opportunity. So when so this is a known example. When I was interviewing Frost back at the Season 2 World Championships in LA, I was told that both, was it Shy at the time? Yeah, both Shy and Mad Life had girlfriends. And so I asked them on air. When I asked them off air about their girlfriends, everyone else was just like, oh yeah, they have girlfriends. Like, yeah, oh, you should ask them. And I was like, oh, no big deal. Well, when I asked them on air, they were like, oh, please, like, come on, everyone knows, like, you should just like send them a love letter on air. And so the notion that Korean players have of on-screen and off-screen personality is very big, and we see this a lot if you hang out with players before they go out on interviews. I had this with Soul Key too at the WCS finals. On the interview, he was pretty enthusiastic, and he was like, oh yeah, I love these questions. I love interacting with Western fans. And once the interview finished, I was like, oh, thank you. Like, you know, I'd love to get to see you more often and interview you more often. And he was just like, yes, that'd be great. And I was like, we were just like joking around for the past half hour on the couch, like that's it. And he's just like, you know, he was a nice guy. He was like, oh yeah, that'd be great. Well, thank you so much for your time. And then he just like, he wasn't even in a rush. He just walked off, and I was like, I think something clicks in them, and it's hard to explain, but I think they have this switch of how they act on broadcast, and it's not intentional. It's just how I guess it's habit, and they know they have to be more enthusiastic on air, so it comes out. And so in a sense, I think all these players in Korea also get secondary training as like personalities. Anyone who's been on stage or on camera knows that you have to exaggerate for your expression to go through. And the players who do it well know this. No one I don't think taught them directly, but they know this because they look at the fan reaction and they're like, this is good, this is bad. And they kind of breathe themselves through that. But other than that, I haven't had too many interesting run-ins with any players. I'm trying to think. I try to avoid them, to be fair. Yeah, I try to avoid them because since I work at OGN, that adds a whole nother level of, if I was just a freelance journalist, it'd be a different story. But since I work for the broadcaster and the tournament organizer, it gets a little bit weird when I talk with these players because they view me as a friend and an interviewer, but then they view me as an employee, and it's like it gets really awkward unless it's actually much more comfortable when we're on air, which is interesting. But
okay, so I have a few questions now actually about you and your career in esports. And so the thing I wanted to know initially is, right, so if people hear about your background, okay, so you have a background, you come from Korea, you have this unique position where you maybe have like you're ideally placed to sort of do the job you do now. It might make sense to people, okay, so a guy who knows about Korean culture can translate from Korean into English, but vice versa as well. This should be in like high demand in esports. It should have been easy for you to get into esports, get your first jobs, get all this. But I heard this story where basically you pulled sort of like something out of a movie. Like, in a movie when someone just like live in the backwoods and they pack up all their stuff and they use all their money for that bus trip to Hollywood, and then they just try to meet that producer and put the script in his hand, and that's what's going to make them a star, But we all think of that like, well, who would really do that? That'd never work. So I heard this story that you went to an MLG and you just like stood outside the offices for hours and hours, and eventually some people came out, right? Some famous people that we all know, and you just sort of like tried to meet them, like, hey, I'm this guy, and somehow this worked, and you got a job out of it, and now you're here. So what really happened?
Okay, so to start off, I used to think like you, where I would sit there and I'd be like, I personally know a lot of Korean Americans who can speak both languages, who like games. Like, why is there not a high demand for, why aren't there like postings all the time looking for transit? Why aren't people clamoring for this job? But I was like, well, I don't care what the reason is. I want to try it because, that's what I can do. And I was also interested in casting, but so I've been casting at home for like amateur tournaments, on stream, just from home. But then I knew my strength was translating. So when this opportunity arose, like you said, it wasn't like a huge plan, but I knew that the MLG Summer Arena was coming up, and that's in New York City. And at the time, I had taken a break from school, so I was living in New Jersey. And I remembered my friend saying a year ago when there was a StarCraft arena that he was down at K-Town and he just ran into these players and he was like, wow, like, why are you guys here? And they were like, oh, we're here for MLG. And he was like, this is great that I live in New York City. Like, I had to meet you guys. And he took pictures with them. And I was like, well, that'd be pretty cool. And I thought to myself, a little bit silly, but I thought to myself, sure, getting a job opportunity would be great, but just meeting these players, even if I'm doing something really dumb by taking this chance, if I get to meet them, it's a great story I can tell. If not, like, whatever, if I had fun on my own, that's fine. So I was looking for reasons to go try to run into these players, and I was like looking at the game schedules and everything. And then when I was looking at the MLG site, I saw that they had the Dr. Pepper Ultimate Fan Experience competition where you take a video or a picture to show why you're like the ultimate fan of Dr. Pepper and MLG. So I wake up on the morning of the first day of the Summer Arena, and I think of this dumb idea, which I would never do again because it's very unhealthy, but I was like, all right, well, I'm going to show that I'm the best fan by drinking only Dr. Pepper and proving it on camera the whole day, and then I'm going to go outside and try to meet these guys. And my goal was to show them that I was a fan by having a sign for like the Summer Arena and getting to meet the players and taking pictures with them. I did not expect that I would end up waiting outside the office for 6 hours. So I took a bus from New Jersey with sign and Dr. Pepper's in my backpack. And then I made a sign at a McDonald's in New York City while I was waiting for the game to end, and then I went to the office. And so this was like the hottest day of summer back last year in New York too. So I was just like dying because I was drinking only soda. I walked into the office and I'm like, hey, so I know this isn't, you know, a live audience event, but, you know, do you think I could go up? And they were like, sorry, our security rules are you can't go up. So I was like, all right, well then can I wait in the lobby until the event's over? And they're like, I guess so. Like, we can't kick you out. So I stood there for, I think first about like an hour or two until Blaze, so Reaper back then, and then the coach on air came down for a smoke break, and they were like, who are you? And I was like, oh great, like you guys are the Korean team. And that's what I really went to see, because when else would I get to see a Korean team? And I was like, man, like can I do a picture with you guys? And then I explained, I was like, I'm a caster, I'm looking to get into esports, so I thought maybe I'll get lucky and get to meet some of the producers here. And so on air was just like, man, it's like really hot outside, I'll ask if you can at least come inside. And he later comes out, he's like, well, they can't right now because they don't know who you are, but you know, hopefully we'll get to see you afterwards. And then I saw teams leave one by one, like I took pictures of all of them, and I was just like an ecstatic fan at this point. I was like, yeah, I got to meet all these players. And then the casters come out, it was super cool. And then some of the production crew starts filing out from MLG, and they see me with the sign for MLG like outside of their office. They're like, who in the world are you? And I explained to them, I'm like, oh, I'm doing this for the Ultimate Fan Experience contest because I want to visit MLG Rally, and I thought this was a good way. And they were like, this is great, like you should really upload it, and you should also tweet Sundance, you know, who runs things at MLG. So I basically just like shot all sorts of contacts, and I actually ran into another journalist at the time at the arena by the name of Slasher. So Slasher was like, you translate, like you can translate. And I was like, yes, I'm confident that I can translate. He's like, you should like meet these guys. And so the next day after uploading my video, I came back without confirmation that I'd be accepted. You know, I had nothing to do. I was taking a break from school, working for amateur tournaments. I was like, all right, I'll take another day off. I'll take a bus back to the city. And I waited downstairs until one of the directors came down, and he was like, listen, we'll, you know, let you come up and hang out for the weekend, like, you know, take a look around and let's talk afterwards. So that's where I got to meet a lot of people like the casters. That's where I met Monte Cristo to start working for GD Chronicle. And at that time, after the event was over, the directors came up to me and they were like, so you can translate? And I was like, yes. And they were like, we'll keep your contact and see how things go for the live events. Of course, the first event after, I ended up winning the video contest too, which was great. So I got to go to Rally where there was no need for an official translator, but I started doing journalism work for GD Chronicle. And that's how things got started. So from then on, like you said, because there is a demand for translations, I would say I was very fortunate. I had to put myself out there, of course, but whenever I did, you know, opportunities were there. And even if they weren't there immediately, people were interested because Korean players are always around. It just depends on the tournament. So I would say I was very fortunate. But yeah, and if I think back now, I'm like, what if I ended up not meeting these players? You know, how stupid would I look if I was like camping outside, sweating bullets, holding the sign for MLG? And I was like, it still would have been fun. You know, I would have had fun. And if I felt like I was going to get laughed at, I can just not tell that story. I can just keep it as a good memory myself. And people always ask me, right? Because I have to say I'm very fortunate because I had a very quick, I guess, rise within my career. It skyrocketed, and people are always like, how'd you do it? And I'm like, I don't know. I did some, you know, silly things, like going outside and camping outside the office. Not all of them worked. Let's be honest. That one worked, but there are times when I like shot emails and I looked for opportunities and I completely got ignored, and I'm like, all right, well now I look dumb, and I'm like, whatever, like I just have to move on. I'm just, you know, putting myself out there, and it's been crazy to think that I'm at OGN now, and in the middle, of course, because I got to translate for MLG, then they knew I casted, so I got to fill in as a caster for a little bit in the studio. I was doing journalism work for GD Chronicle. This all came together, you know, met a lot of people, and now I'm here. You know, those details, it's like once you get in, as I'm sure anyone in esports can tell you, is that if you network like you will find more opportunities, because right now it's booming so much everywhere that you just have to be willing to go to wherever geographical location, really. But yeah, it started from me being one of those like in my room streamers who broadcast amateur tournaments to a couple hundred viewers, to now, coming all the way out here, translating and sometimes casting for, the premier tournaments out in Korea. It was pretty crazy. And yeah, I think it's a little bit special. It has a special place in my heart when the moment when I met Blaze and the MLG crew, because I always think back to that to remind myself that I can't take this job for granted. I have a salary now, like I have a good life, but I don't want to sit here and get complacent. And I always want to help. If some people are like, hey, are there opportunities? I'm like, yes. As a translator, sure, keeping myself as a unique, I guess, attribute to the company, or like a unique tool, is great. Keeping myself special is cool, but at the same time, like, I want to get all this content out, and there's a lot of things that need to be translated or worked on. I'm totally down if people want to come in. And I've talked to a couple people who have shown great interest, and they're like, well, here's what I can do. And I never worry about like, well, what if this guy out translates me? It's like, well, if he out translates me, like, he deserves to be there. And that's why I started with League of Legends too. I originally wanted to do casting and translating for StarCraft, but then when I looked at the community for StarCraft 2, there were plenty of casters who were well respected, and then there were a couple of translators who were doing just fine too, and I respected their work. I felt no need to have to go in and compete with them and try to vie for their jobs. It's like there's a piece of the pie for everyone. Like Monte Cristo always used to tell me, and I agree. I thought, fine, I like League of Legends too, I'll go that route. Now if I get to work for StarCraft 2 again from Korea, love it. I love StarCraft. But back then, I had no reason to try to compete with them and either get shut out by them or me shutting them out. Like, there's no need for that. And so I always think back to that moment. I still have the poster of when I got Blaze's signatures. Of course, now it's not as meaningful because Reaper is no longer on the team, but I still keep that poster because I always look at it and I'm like, yeah, man, it was only a year ago where I was sweating outside the MLG office, and that's how all of this started. And I think it really gives me more appreciation. It reminds me of what people want as a fan. Although I'm in the industry now, looking at that poster and then looking at VODs or live streams, I can kind of get back into the mood of back when I was there. Like, I was just like sitting in my chair enjoying streams and playing the game. It all sounds very like cliche and dramatic, but that's just what it was, and I appreciate it. Yeah.
So as you mentioned, you did a lot of different things on your way. So you did you've done interviews, you did some casting, you've done like some journalism aspect of obviously, but the thing that you've become famous for is the translation. And so I actually think it's funny that in League of Legends, that's actually your main job, but actually in StarCraft, over the last few months, I've noticed people kind of like have appreciated your actual interpretation of live interviews, mainly because famously in StarCraft we had some examples of people where tech speak Korean, but either they could speak Korean and didn't know the game, or they knew the game and their Korean was a bit wonky, and so it was never like the ideal scenario. Whereas actually thinking about some of the things you've said here, I mean, the funny thing is people always say translator, but actually the correct term for someone in real life is interpreter. And the funny thing is, that's not even just like a term difference. It's actually in terms of how it's done, it's sort of different. Because if you take something on text, you'll probably try and translate it word for word. That's how the translation element will work. But actually, if you ever look, part of why interpreters, one of the highest paid jobs like per hour in the world that I've noticed, is because if you ever watch a press conference where someone's interpreting live, they usually have like 2 earpieces for people who listen, and the idea is whatever language you don't know, you just put in the right earpiece and they will try and like translate as the person speaking. They don't wait for them to say everything then tell you what afterwards. And so as a result, it's a skill like being like an amazing saxophone player. Like a saxophone player has to do that rhythmic breathing where they breathe in but they're breathing out at the same time. It's like, to a normal person that sounds impossible, but you can learn the skill. And so the interpreter's doing the same thing. He's taking the sentence in, saying it out, while at the same time listening to the next sentence, saying it out. And so in esports, no one's going to do that. That's like a ridiculous task. That would be like a fool's errand, for real interviews. So instead, what we do for interpretation is we have someone listen to a 5-minute answer and then tell you what the person said. And then someone comes along online and goes, well, actually, that's not what they said. They exactly said this. It's like, well, how the fuck's he going to remember that and repeat it all word for word? But this leads into something I've heard about you, okay, which is that you have a theory about how a translator or interpreter can actually interpret what the player is saying. So he doesn't just say what the player said. He kind of tries to do what we've done in this interview. He kind of tries to give the context of what he might mean by that, or what the equivalent would be in Western terminology. He doesn't just translate, he interprets. Like, what is your theory in this sense? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, I mean, so here is what I do, right? When I interpret interviews, I literally interpret it. So I listen to the full answer, and people often ask, right, because a question I get a lot is how do you interpret these long answers? Because I never want to break the player off. I don't want to say, hold on, let me interpret this part, because I'm like, well, what if, especially because in Korean, here's the other important thing, actually, I just thought of this too. Korean, even the grammar wise, you never know what the person means until the very end. So everything is decided with the very last word. Whether it's a question or anything, all of that, the context is decided at the end. So, you know, even Koreans know that. So they joke about how you always have to listen very carefully to the very end of someone's response to know their intention. And I think that goes a long way, even in overall context, because that's how people talk. We don't give the context first and then our conclusion. Oftentimes we'll give the conclusion first. And so I've always hated cutting people off in the middle, because then I've tried it and I've interpreted it, and then they say something, I'm like, well, now I have to go back on it and fix what I said. And I always try to wait, and then the question becomes, so how do you do that? It's not a matter of memory. I used to play music, so I do have a lot of training in memory, but what I do is I listen, and then I basically digest all of their information. And so it's as if I was just watching the interview, and I'm like, oh, so like player A just really likes eating pizza because he really likes mozzarella cheese. I understand that now. And then I'll talk back, I'll interpret it as if I'm explaining it to my friend. I'm like, hey, you know what I heard? Player A really likes pizza because he really likes mozzarella cheese. I wouldn't go up to him and be like, hey, you know what I heard? Word for word, player A said, I do like mozzarella cheese and therefore I like pizza. Like, you know, it's a very different context. And so when I listen to interviews, that's why I think that helps me at the WCS. It helped me host the show too, because I legitimately wanted to be a part of the conversation, because that's naturally how I interpret things. And so this guy says something, you know, Soul Key, for instance, will answer the question, or, oh, here's a good example where people have questions. And yeah, like you said, it's very dangerous territory. And I always get scared when I interpret, because the way I do it, it's very extreme. So if people like it, it'll be really good. But then if I interpret something the wrong way, if I actually misrepresent the player, it can be disastrous, because what if I didn't know the situation? So I always get scared, and this happened when MVP was on the interview for the WCS Season 1 Finals. And, you know, we were talking about how he's from Europe and how he's a nickname Jurgen, and how does that all play in? And MVP was just constantly saying in Korean, word for word, basically what he said was, well, I play from Europe and I have European fans. If you say it like that, it doesn't seem to mean much. But from how I had interacted with him backstage, I could tell that him even giving me that much smile and that tone meant that he wanted he wanted to express something more than just a fact. And so when I interpreted, I was like, well, you know, MVP appreciates his European fans a lot, because that's what I felt from MVP. And someone had responded, they're like, well, that's not exactly what he said. I don't think what, you know, Chobra did was wrong, but, you know, why? How can we accept that? Like, why is that? And before I could even get to it, someone answered for me, and they said, it's because the way I do it is I try to get to know the person before, and I will explain whatever I feel from them. So it's not even about their word, what they intended. If their body language is something I've never seen before, I'll try to express that in my words too. And so I put a lot of value in at least saying hi to these players before the interviews start, so that I can tell like their level of modesty, you know, how much they value Korean culture in terms of, you know, being the mannerisms of bowing to each other or things like that. I try to gauge that and then say, okay, so he's somewhere on this spectrum. So then during the interview, if he even like, you know, shows a little bit more excitement, although normally it would be nothing, then I'm gonna think he's trying to express something a lot more beyond anything he's normally experienced. Is that necessarily the best way? I don't know. Obviously, I haven't interpreted around the world, but that's what's been working out for me. I do agree it's dangerous, and I often worry about it. I was actually really worried about. Interestingly enough, I was super worried before the WCS finals because I had never done any work officially for StarCraft, and because I had been so focused on League of Legends, I was a little bit out of touch with the StarCraft 2 scene. And also, as people notoriously know now, is that I didn't know all the unit names in Korean because I didn't play it in Korean. And so going in, I try to study as much as I can about the players, but you know, I had never interacted with these guys before because I wasn't there in the studio. I hadn't watched as many of their recent interviews or plays. And so my biggest worry was not, what if I'm awkward or what if I misinterpret something that's just common grammar mistake? My biggest worry was, what if they infer to an event or a time when they did something and I just have no idea what they're talking about. Okay. And it's like they meant it as it was a great event, but I portray it as it was a nightmare, you know. And that's some of the biggest fears with the method I take, because if you don't know the scenario, then you can't, and the player is, you know, still has no expression in their face, then you can't tell if they meant it as good or bad. Thankfully, we didn't have any of those incidents at the WCS finals, and now that I know I'm going to be doing a lot more work for StarCraft, I stay in tune with the news, with the scene news. But yeah, I think, you know, the way I do it, I think it works out well, and the most important thing is I need to know them off stage so that I know how to gauge their on stage personality.
So in terms of when you were talking about body language there, you said something that was quite interesting from my own experience, which is this idea that if you're on camera, then you have to exaggerate. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, to you, it's going to look like you're being really crazy, but actually it's just so that it picks it up on the camera. Like the way people experience things when they're looking through a camera is very different. And I've actually noticed this in my own career doing interviews. So I never had thought of this consciously, right? But when I would do interviews, because I'd done them so much, like I'm not worried in maybe the way like a beginner would be about like the words I'm saying or the words the other guy's saying. I'm just sort of like listening to the rough thing of his ideas and letting them soak in a bit. So when I would be looking at the player that I was talking to, so that I could tell how to phrase the next question, I'd try and gauge how he's responding to this question. Mm-hmm. And so part of that I realized when I reflected back would be that I didn't know this consciously, but what I would be doing is I'd be looking for very small movements, like if like he didn't like a question, maybe like initially he'd have like a very small micro expression of like his mouth would just tighten up a little bit or something. And so on camera, what's funny is I remember I did a particular interview, and I won't mention the player, but constantly as I would ask questions, I kept thinking like, oh, this guy's hating this interview, like he looks really like pissed off, like he's like every time I say certain words he reacts in a certain way. But he never walked out the interview. No one noticed this when I watched it back. You couldn't see any of these reactions, right, because they were so subtle. And basically what was happening was, this is when I realized this theory, because what I realized was every time he would react that way, it would make me think for the next question, okay, for the next one I can't just be like blunt in how I say it. I have to like sort of be a bit careful in how I say it, because obviously this guy's not necessarily like as open to some of these questions, or maybe he doesn't like critical questions in this way. And so I was just shaping it in this way. And so when you talk about like you're trying to read people's body language and all these sorts of things, is this just all things you've picked up naturally? Have you like studied anything in this area? I mean, like, is it something where you feel like from your experiences doing this work, do you get like a good sense of someone when you meet them after a short while without necessarily like just interpreting what they've said like directly?
Yeah, I think for me, so I haven't studied it officially anywhere, but for me, it's become habit to, I guess, kind of figure someone out as soon as I can, because when I was in middle and high school, I touched on this briefly earlier, I used to be very focused on music, and I actually wanted to go into classical music. As we all know, like anywhere really, even in Korea, if your dream is to become a classical musician when you're in your teens and everyone else is out there playing football and baseball, it's not as well accepted, you know, amongst your peers. It's not, they're not necessarily going to hate on you or like bully you, but it's also not something that they're going to gather around and be like, oh, this is so cool. You know, it's just like, well, oh, that's great. Like, I think it's very cool. And then they just won't care. But then I always wanted to be part of a lot of activities, so I had to figure out a way to know what the other person I was interacting with liked, and then mimic that back. And so whether it's activities, whether it's sense of humor, body language, like you said, and I just started picking up on this on my own, because for my own, like, I guess, like, self-defense and the social juggle of, like, middle schoolers, high schoolers, where it's very brutal. You know, I had to do it for my own sanity if I wanted to hang out with my friends. You know, like, making jokes about Mozart was not going to go through. You know, no one even, like, cares what happened to Mozart at that age. So then I'm sitting there thinking, like, I have no idea why this is funny, but they think it's funny, so I need to pick up on this, and I need to figure out why they think it's funny. Whether I agree or not is irrelevant. And then I can form my own jokes and go from there. And over the course of pretty much my entire time before college, I think I had built up enough habit for myself to kind of, or a process to figure this out. And so now it comes in handy when I'm, you know, interviewing people, because, you know, I'll meet them, and even when say when I first meet a player, the first thing I notice is, do they smile or not when they say hi to me? Because in Korea, it's not necessarily rude that they don't smile, right? They could just be bowing because they're out of respect. But if they even make a slight smile, they're intrigued. You know, they want to know who I am. They want to know what we're doing. And one thing I noticed when I was interviewing Solkey, that question about SOS's character, like, what's unique about him? When I first just asked, like, so, you know, what's unique about SOS? Like, what is something that fans might not know? I actually kind of knew in my head that Solkey wouldn't give me the answer we wanted. He would just be like, oh, like, SOS is kind of different this way. But when I was asking him the question, listening, you could tell that he had, like, a slight smile. So he was thinking of these examples, but he wasn't telling us. So before I translated, I was like, no, but really, like, can you give us an example? Like, is there a story? And so he barely gave us that example with the light, and, you know, it was funny. But if I think if I hadn't paid attention to how he was reacting when I was speaking, I would just be content saying, like, oh, he says SOS is a little bit of a rebel. That's that. You know, there's no interesting stories there. So yeah, I didn't study it. I mean, sure, I've read books on, like, psychology and, you know, things like that, but it's not like I took courses or got a degree in that department. I think it was really how I built myself up during my childhood, and how I kind of assimilated with the rest of my peers throughout, I guess, my adolescent years, that has become kind of second nature for me to react to people's interactions.
So I always end these interviews with a hypothetical question, but for players, it's a bit more obvious how I'm going to do it, but I've got a way I'm going to do it for you, okay? So aliens come to Earth, like they always do. But this time what they do, okay, is before they, like, attack the Earth, like they always do as well in my questions, they sort of observe a bit, you know, they, like, watch like a culture of the world, like look at all the different countries. And so the first thing they notice is, like, they find out about, like, esports in Korea, and they go, like, this is awesome, like, we love, like, the structure of it and everything. Plus, you know, like, some of these Korean players, like Moon and Effort, like, I mean, they look like us anyway, like, they're aliens. And so Korea is obviously the best of the humans. You know, we're going to model our new society on Earth on Koreans. So that's, I mean, we're going to have to kill a lot of people here. So we're going to kill basically all of NA in Europe. Just get rid of that crap. Just wipe it off the map. And then we're going to repopulate with our sort of Korean/alien hybrids across the whole world. And so since we're going to remodel everything like Korea, then we're going to allow esports to exist, but it's going to be Korean-style esports. So Europe's going to have Korean-style esports, NA's going to have Korean-style esports. But what we'll do is, okay, so we along the way, we found this anomaly, this guy called Chobra, and he actually understands somehow, like, both of the cultures. So since he understands the culture that we're about to destroy, like, we don't want to destroy everyone, because what if there's, like, an anomaly over there, like someone who's, like, a player who could have made it in the Korean system. And so we're going to make him, like, the commissioner for the European and NA region, and we're going to let him pick out 5 players who we won't kill, who are pros in Europe and NA. He can pick 5, and you're going to pick them based on the fact that they could actually survive under this Korean strict system of how to practice, how to play, the expectations. So they have to be able to survive and thrive. Which 5 people from either Europe or NA combined, who could survive under this scene from Chobra's point of view?
Is this, like, both like any titles, or?
Oh, League of Legends.
League of Legends. All right, let's stick with League of Legends. Oh man, this is a tough question. I would say double lift. I think double lift could survive.
Is there any reason tells you that?
Just because double lift, sure, like he has this like personality, at least on the internet, of being arrogant, but he has that drive to be the best. And like if the rest of the world was taken over and put into Korean esports, like I think he would go in there and accept that as his fate to become the best there. I think he would have the drive. Oh, this is tough. From Europe, I want to say from Europe, I do want to say that I think what is it? I think Diamond Prox would do well. This is out of the blue because I don't know him as well as a person. I haven't interacted with him, but I think while now he doesn't have that drive, again, if he was put into that environment, he would accept it and move on. You know, I think that's the biggest thing here is would they be willing to accept their fate? Yeah. Which narrows it down quite a bit. I think from Europe, I think actually no. Nope. This is tough. This is very, very tough. I would say oh, you know what? I think High from Cloud9 would do well. And I also think Mandatory Cloud would do okay. I'm not sure though. I'm not sure if he would last. I think he would enter though.
So that's one more.
Yeah, that's 4, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. The last one I would pick. I'm gonna go ahead and say I think Yellow Pete.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think that's a little bit.
Think for him?
I think with Yellow Pete, it's different from the other players. The other players I picked were players who have had at least for a short time, like a spark of stardom. With Yellow Pete, I think it's because I think he would assimilate the most to the culture. I think he'd be willing to explore the culture. The other players, I think it'd be the drive to like be the best player, but I think with Yellow Pete it would be, this is just a guess, but I think he would be more interested in figuring it out and learning the culture. And of course, like I'm not like best, but I've talked to Yellow Pete a little bit, and I got that sense. So he's a little bit different from the other 4 that I've picked, but those would be the 5.
Okay, so do you have like a final statement or message or someone you want to thank or say hello to?
You know, I mean, of course, this is actually really cliche, but I've actually never thanked my parents like in any public matter, because like I said, I didn't tell them right away, and even now they don't know exactly what I do, but my dad actually knows because he lives in Korea, so now and then when the OGN articles hit the front page of like search engines, he'll be like, oh, like were you there for that event? He'll ask me. But you know, like I said, for Korean parents to be this supportive and, you know, let me like live on my own and give me, you know, any funds I need to pursue this career, I think is great. And I never really actually acknowledged their help to the public, but I think it's huge. So I do want to thank them, but of course I want to thank, you know, the community and everyone I've met. Like I'm not going to start naming names of anyone because it would just get too long, but I do want to say, you know, this is something I've always wanted to say to people, and I think because it's been so short for me since I've entered the scene, hopefully it makes it a little bit more relatable. When people are like, how do you get into esports? How do you get into sports? You know, the more you ask and the more you study how other people get into sports, the less you're going to have a chance. And that's the same in anything. Like when I was doing research back in the day, the more I studied it, the less I had new ideas, because then all your brain is just filled with all these things other people have done, and it's not original anymore. But you know, you just got to remember why you like the game or why you like esports. And a lot of people have trouble with that once they enter the scene, because you don't get to play it as much, and you're like, shoot, why is it fun? You know, you forget, and then you have to take some time. So yeah, it's super cliche, but really, I would say, I'm not even gonna say like put yourself out there, but I would say really focus on why it's fun for you. And if it's a special reason, then there you go. You figure something out that way. But otherwise, like, thanks to everyone for supporting me. Really, I think I'm so fortunate, and hopefully I'll see people at more events, hopefully more international events in both titles, StarCraft and League of Legends. And that's Chobra.